All right, Chapter 10, Old Ireland. From the preceding chapters, we have seen that at the very time the Lord made the promise to David, about 1040 BC, I will appoint a place for my people Israel and will plant them, that they may dwell in a place of their own, to Samuel 7:10. That promise was being executed. In fact, 60 years before the promise was made, Brutus had arrived in the Isles of the West in 1100 BC and had named them Brithain, the Covenant Land. Until this day, the only name in the Hebrew for Britain was Ahahem, the Isles of the West. Ai, or Hai, being the origin of Isle. In early days, the Isle of Ionia was called the High of Ionia. Bible students have wondered where those 7,000 men in Israel were that did not bow down their knee to Baal in the time of Elijah, as told in 1 Kings 19:18. And Elijah himself wondered where they were, as he did not know of many in the kingdom of Israel and Palestine. In the light of what has been revealed here, those 7,000 God-fearing men of Israel were the Druids in the appointed place, Britain. If we review the books of Joshua, Judges, Samuel, Kings, and Chronicles and follow the history of Israel for the period of 440 years until the end of Solomon's reign, it looks tragic that Israel should have struggled for over 350 years before David and Solomon brought unity, peace, and prosperity to the nation, and the temple was built, and that as soon as the temple was dedicated in 1000 BC, when Solomon was at the height of his glory, disaster should come within 30 years. Can we not see an exact counterpart of that in America during the last 15 years? America believed she was sitting on top of the world. All that brains and money could do was accomplished. Even President Hoover believed in 1928 that we have almost banished poverty from our shores, when in 1930 the dream suddenly faded away and the disappointment came. So it was with Solomon. His days were golden days, and silver was accounted for as nothing. The ships of Tarshish brought all the treasures of the known world to Jerusalem, and all the luxuries and vices also, to say nothing of 700 wives and 300 concubines for the king. His success and glory turned Solomon's heart. He began to worship strange gods and neglected Jehovah. So has America today. Wherefore the Lord said unto Solomon, forasmuch as this is done of thee, and thou hast not kept my covenant and my statutes, which I have commanded thee, I will surely rend the kingdom from thee, and will give it to thy servant. 1 Kings 11:11. It was the last warning given at the 11th hour, as the 11th verse of the 11th chapter indicates. Within 20 years, the kingdom of Israel was taken from the house of David and given to Jeroboam. I will take the kingdom out of his son's hand, and I will give it unto thee, even 10 tribes. This verse and several others in the 11th and 12th chapters of 1 Kings make it evident that the kingdom of Israel henceforth consisted only of 10 tribes, while the 2 tribes of Benjamin and Judah constituted the kingdom of Judah, whose people in later years were called the Jews. We have seen from the previous chapters that ever since Israel entered Canaan 5 centuries before, the natural increase of the people, amounting to many millions during the 500 years, had left the country and settled in distant lands. They left family after family, shipload after shipload, in the same way that the people of England, Scotland, Ireland, Germany, and other European countries have left their native shores and come to America. And still, there are more Scotsmen and Dutchmen life in the old country than there were 300 years ago. After 5 centuries of emigration, there were still over 5 million Israelites left in Palestine when Solomon's kingdom was divided into 2 separate kingdoms of 10 and 2 tribes, respectively. But many times greater numbers of Israelites had left the country than there were at the time of Solomon, yet this fact Bible students seem to have overlooked completely. After the separation of the 2 tribes from Israel, the latter could no longer go to Jerusalem and worship Jehovah in the temple. So Jeroboam, their king, set up 2 golden calves, one in Bethel and the other in Dan, for the people to worship. And Bel, the god of sunfire, took the place of Jehovah. Swiftly the judgment came, and Israel disintegrated during the next 300 years. When the 12 tribes, after their entry into Palestine about 1445 BC, divided the land among themselves, the tribes of Dan and Simon were located in the south between the coast of the Dead Sea, with Judah and Benjamin north of them. The 18th chapter of Judges tells us that within 40 years the Danaanites became dissatisfied with their lot and sent 5 men by boat to Zidon to look for larger territory near the city, which they found at Laish. And after bringing from home 600 men, they took Laish and killed its inhabitants without ceremony. This unscrupulous deed showed the daring spirit of the Danites, who from that time forward kept emigrating to the Aegean islands close by, and so also did the other Israelites located near the seashore. The passage in the 5th chapter of Judges, verse 17, "And why did Dan remain in ships?" indicate that even in those early days the people of Dan followed a seafaring life. After the division of the kingdom, both the tribes of southern Dan and of Simon were separated from their friends in Israel by the kingdom of Judah. And as the two kingdoms were enemies most of the time, the people of Dan and Simon felt themselves endangered by the people of Judah and immigrated constantly. Finally, the day came in which the whole tribe, that is, what was left of it, resolved to leave in a body and seek another home. A Jewish writer of the 9th century A.D., Eldud, by name, tells us, in Jeroboam's time, 900 to 970 BC, the tribe of Dan, being unwilling to shed their brethren's blood, took a resolve to leave the country. Where did they go? From what we have learned before, a constant traffic had been in existence for 1,000 years between Palestine and her colonies in the west. Iberia had been settled for centuries by the Hebrews, as the name indicated, and so also had England by Brutus and his people. But there was one island which was so far had only been touched by the Phoenicians and was thinly settled. It was the most western isle, the greenest and fairest of them all, the Emerald Isle, the Inisfail, the Wonderful Isle. Moses spoke of Dan. Dan is a lion's whelp, he shall leap from Bashan. From Bashan, Dan did leap, and appears in the Irish Chronicles as the Tuatha Danann, meaning in reality the tribe of Dan. The Irish Chronicles tells us that the landing of the Danann in Ireland was opposed by the people already there, and a battle followed in which the Danann were victorious. The Danann, however, discovered that their opponents spoke a language similar to their own, the Phoenician language, and peace was made, by which it was agreed that the Danann should occupy the northern part of the island, called Ulad, the modern Ulster, where they became the dominant race for several centuries. The people who opposed the Danann called themselves Formorians or Ferorians, and used as their battle cry the word Pharaoh, which appears to be a form of Pharaoh and the title of the Egyptian kings. Light on this is thrown by an ancient Jewish rabbi, quoted by the Reverend A.B. Grimaldi, who says that those early Irish were men of the tribe of Ephraim who left Egypt before the Exodus. At Longyear, near Limerick, and elsewhere, there are ancient stone circles consisting of 12 stones, one large stone in the center and 11 smaller ones standing in a bowing attitude around it. Irish antiquaries tell us that those circles perpetuate the dream of Joseph, as told in the 37th chapter of Genesis, wherein Joseph dreamed that his sheaf was the largest, standing in the center, while those of his 11 brethren stood around and made obeisance to his sheaf. This may seem like another fairy tale, yet those stone circles are still there. There existed also an ancient Irish law which regulated the number of colors to be worn by persons of each caste. The princes could wear 7 colors, the prophets 6, the nobility 5, the officers 3, the soldiers 2, and the common people only 1. Here again do we find evidence of the descent from Joseph, whose fathers made him a coat of many colors, writes O'Halloran, the Irish historian. and probably the plaid, according to the colors of which the Scotch clans were distinguished, originated in Joseph's coat of many colors. Another Irish antiquary, Colonel Valancy, tells us that there were Irish priests on the word for a stone pillar. In Tyrone was found a famous awn overlaid with gold. All this appears to be a reminder of Joseph, who married a daughter of Potiphar, a sun priest of On. So also are the sacred wells of Ireland, commemorative of Joseph being placed in a well or pit by his brethren. So also is the ancient Irish custom to swear by the sun, moon, and stars, commemorative of Joseph's dream, wherein the sun, moon, and stars bowed down to him. Furthermore, it is remarkable that all the ancient Irish stone circles were originally called bothels by the people, or the house of God, which word we can easily connect with the Bethel of the 28th chapter of Genesis, where God confirmed the Abrahamic covenant to Jacob, and in memory thereof Jacob erected the stone upon which he had lain. And he called the name of that place Bethel. All the ancient Irish traditions, names, and monuments corroborate each other and appear to indicate that Ireland's earliest settlers, the Ferrorians, were men of Ephraim. As these people, according to some ancient writers, had left Egypt before the Exodus, they must have left there before 1500 BC, as the Exodus took place in 1486 BC. Of course, they may not have gone at once to Ireland, but may have remained in Iberia for some time. Like England, the Emerald Isle has many monuments telling of a bygone age and proving to us unmistakably that its earliest settlers were Phoenicians. Plate number 19 shows the entrance to the ancient Phoenician burial mound, or tumulus, near Grange. In front of its entrance can be seen Phoenician sun spirals carved on the stone slab and turning in two directions, representing, according to Professor Waddell, the movement of the sun from left to right and that of the returning or resurrecting sun from right to left. Those symbols, like the left-handed swastika shown on the front cover of this book, are early expressions of a belief in a coming resurrection of the dead and were therefore appropriately placed in front of this ancient sepulchre. Plate 9 shows stone carvings on the hill of Tara with sun spirals and sun crosses. Refer to chapter 12. In its folklore and chronicles, Ireland has preserved more of its ancient past than England, which has become too advanced in thought. Thomas More, in his History of Ireland, says of the geography of Ptolemy, "It is worthy of remark that while of the towns and places of Britain he has in general given but the new Roman names, those of Ireland still have on his map their old Celtic titles. The city of Hibernia still tells a tale of far distant times." Speaking of names found in Spain, Moore says, "The Iberni, whose chief city, according to Ptolemy, was Avernus or Hibernus, we can little doubt as to the source from whence the Avernus derived its name, when we find on the northwest coast of Spain another river Arun, and also a sacred promontory in its immediate neighborhood being of the same name." Again, he speaks of the race to whom the southern region of Ireland owed its Ibri and Hibernus, the names of the rivers Erne and its sacred promontory, having existed ages before the time when the Scotti, a comparatively recent people, unknown to Maximus of Tyre or even to Ptolemy himself, found their way to those shores. The Enduring Empire of the British by Reverend P.H. Pritchett. It is well-known history that the Scots of Scotland came originally from that fine race of people, the Irish Scotch of Ulster. The origin of the word Scot, Professor Waddell has traced from Exat or Kate or Gadi, meaning fortune seekers or adventurers, as explained in chapter 6. A striking account of the coming of those early settlers is given us by the Chronicles of Erie, or the history of the Gael Scott Aber, written in Phoenician and translated by Roger O'Connor. This is the way it begins. Hear the tale of the times of old, here our race, the renowned of the earth. Our great fathers dwelt beyond the sources of the great waters. Then did they spread themselves from the flood of Snig to the Tethagris, and then, after reaching to Aphrodisias, they became lords of all the lands of this people. Then, after centuries, they met with disasters, for the chronicler records a multitude from the sun's rising beneath the land of the first abode of our great fathers poured in upon the land of our fathers that then lived, like unto the swarm of locusts, yea, even as a torrent of mighty waters. Their name is Is-Saur. Quotation from the Royal House of Britain by Reverend W. M. Milner. The ancient Irish story is remarkable, for it is essentially the same story as told in the previous chapters of this book. It begins way back with the coming of the Aryan race, the renowned of the earth, after the flood, to the valley of the Tigris, where they became the rulers of the primitive races. The chronicle does not mention Abraham nor Israel, nor is it continuous, neither does it take up the history of Israel until the Assyrian invasions, the Is-Saur. Those Assyrian invasions began in 745 BC. The second came in 722, and the third and final deportation of Israel, the 10 tribes, took place in 677 BC. As early as the 9th century BC, the growing Assyrian power began to harass the people of Syria and Israel and struck terror into the inhabitants of the whole land of Phoenicia. It was then that the greatest immigration of Israelites took place to the Ionic states on the coast of Asia Minor, the Aegean Islands, and Macedonia, where they were safe from Assyria, and with them they brought a new impetus to the life of early Hellas. Of those 12 Ionic states, one was Miletus, whose people were of the tribe of Judah and descendants of Darda, the founder of Troy. It is a significant circumstance, writes H. B. Hannay, that at an earlier date in the annals of Miletus, there is said to have sailed from its harbors a body of adventurers. These people were led by a certain Gadalius, Gadel, or Gallum, according to Professor Totten. The name Gadalius is the Latin form of Gadil. In the form Gadil frequently used, the meaning is to be great or to become great, to be exalted. In the plural, Gadilum, the exalted, the great, the fortunate. The Gadilians are said to have boasted that they were the heroes of Spain. The word Gadil, however, does not necessarily mean that they were of the tribe of Gad. Passing through the Straits of Gibraltar, the Milesians settled for a while in Spain and founded the city of Brigantia. Of these adventures, the Irish scholar A. M. Sullivan writes in his Story of Ireland, as quoted by H. B. Hannay on page 98, the Milesian colony reached Ireland from Spain, but they were not Spaniards. They were an eastern people who had tarried in that country on their way westward, seeking, they said, an island promised to the prosperity of their ancient Gadalius. Moved by this mysterious purpose to fulfill their destiny, they had passed from land to land, from the shores of Asia across the wide expanse of southern Europe, bearing aloft through all their wanderings the sacred banner, which symbolized to them at once their origin and their mission, the blessing and the promise given to their race. The celebrated standard, the sacred banner of the Milesians, was a flag on which was represented a dead serpent and the rod of Moses, a device to commemorate forever amongst the posterity of Gadalius the miracle by which his life had been saved. Thomas More, the Bard of Erin, commemorates their coming in the following beautiful lines. They came from a land beyond the sea, and now o'er the western main set sail in their good ships gallantly from the sunny land of Spain. Oh, where the land we've seen in dreams, our destined home or grave, thus sang they as by the morning beams they swept the Atlantic wave. And lo, where afar o'er the ocean shines a sparkle of radiant green, as though in that deep lay emerald mines whose light through the wave was seen. 'Tis Innisfail, 'tis Innisfail, rings o'er the echoing sea, while bending to heaven the warriors hail that home of the brave and free. Then turned they unto the eastern wave, where now their day's God's eye a look of such sunny omen gave as lighted up sea and sky. Nor frown was seen through sky or sea, nor tear o'er leaf or sod, when first on the isle of destiny our great forefathers trod. Irish chronology places the coming of these Gadalios about 700 to 650 BC. Their landing in Ulad was, however, fiercely contested by the Danans in the land, but the Gadalios held their ground and became the aristocracy of Aaron. As they were of the same race of Israel, but of the house of Judah, they of course amalgamated with the Danan, and out of the various forms, Gadil, Gadelos, Gadels, Gadhil, the term Gael and Scot emerged, and Gaelic, the name of the language of Ireland, and the related Gaelic of Scotland, both of them branches of the Phoenician, as is also the Welsh and Manx. In Isaiah 28:11, we read, "For with stammering lips and another tongue will the Lord speak to his people." Strong's Concordance gives the Hebrew word for stammering as Gael, while Young's Analytical Concordance gives stammering as League. It is most striking, therefore, that one of the old names for the Irish should be Legel, or in Hebrew, a stammering people, the double word representing the left to right Phoenician and the right to left Hebrew. This is the background of that fine race of Northern Ireland, the Gaelic Scots, and the Highlanders of Scotland, the finest race of people who ever lived, and the writer does not belong to them either. These people, who like their ancestors, are still great adventurers and fortune seekers, carrying civilization and also the cross to the ends of the earth, and whose ancient name of Gadai, Katai, or Exat was spelled with a St. Andrew's cross, as we have seen in chapter 6. But it appears that very little of the Hebrew Phoenician blood is left in Ireland, save in Ulster. In the southern part of the country, the Hamitic Phoenician blood has been infused and has created a mixed race, which has been making trouble ever since. As we have identified in our study the Aryan race with the Caucasian or white race, we have then the whole of Europe with a few exceptions in the most northern and in the eastern part belonging to the Aryans, and of course their descendants in America, etc. Among these Aryans, the Hebrews are the most prominent and most numerous, predominating in the British Isles, Scandinavia, Germany, Holland, and Switzerland. In the Latin countries, the Hamitic element is in the majority, while the people of the Balkans and Russia are mostly Japhetic. A large Semitic element is also found in Arabia, Persia, and India. Most of the Semites are, of course, Hebrews, numbering between 4 and 500 millions, and half of them are Israelites. The Jews number only about 15 million people, yet they have passed off as the whole show. I also wish to point out here that millions of Israelites who found the confines of Little Palestine too narrow emigrated northward and crossed the Dardanelles into Europe, where they are recorded by the Roman writers as the Cimmerians, Gauls, and Senonans. The latter word is the Latin for Simon. This tribe, like that of southern Dan, was cut off when Judah separated from Palestine voluntarily without going into Assyrian captivity. The Sinoans, together with their brethren the Gauls, defeated the Romans in the Battle of Alaya on July 18th, 390 BC, and set fire to Rome itself. This was the first collision that Israel, the fifth world empire, had with Rome, the fourth empire of Daniel's prophecy. Roman writers speak very frequently of the Sumerians who, coming from the Black or Cimmerian Sea, roamed over Europe for centuries. But so indefinite are their wanderings and so confusing their amalgamation into the nations of Christian Europe that it is not worthwhile to follow them here. That those Sumerians were Israelites is evident from their name, derived from Omri or Kumri, the idolatrous king of Israel. The Latin word Sumerian means darkness. This is derived from the Hebrew word Cimmerian, which occurs in 2 Kings 23:5 and Hosea 10:5 and applies to the idolatrous priests of Israel. Cimmerian and Chimerium also means blackness or darkness. We therefore find Homer speaking of the Cimmerian darkness. The name of the Crimea is also derived from that source. It appears, however, as stated in chapter 8, that the earliest Aryan immigrants into Britain also called themselves Cymri or Kimri. These people from us, that we can only trace them by their names. The name of the Abari, preserved in Averbury circles, certainly indicates that the earliest Japhetic immigrants were soon followed by Hebrews, who also adopted the name of Kimri or Cymri, from which is derived from Cumbers, Cumberland, and Northumberland. The word Sumerian, given to Israel, means a people walking in or being in darkness, and so were the Israelites, who had forsaken the Lord and were abandoned by him and cast in the darkness for a period of 7 times. This period of 7 times is fully explained by the author in his book, The 7 Times of Prophecy. As that period has about expired, the blindness is being taken from modern Israel, and they are beginning to recognize themselves. There it is. All right, chapter 11, the Anglo-Saxons. Before proceeding further, I wish to point out to the reader, and particularly to those students who are interested in the lost 10 tribes, that none of the Israelites we have spoken of so far went into Assyrian captivity. Many students have concerned themselves with the fate of the lost 10 tribes, which represented the kingdom of Israel, but few people have realized that at least 3 times as many Israelites left their homeland before the captivities began, either compelled by the increase in population or beginning with the 9th century for fear of the Assyrian power, which then was invading the land of the Hittites and Syria. Ever since the reign of Jeroboam, Israel had rejected Jehovah and worshipped Baal and the golden calf, and the retribution was not long in coming. Like all other nations that have defied God, Israel also had to pay for their folly, although they did not know the why and the wherefore of their punishment. Neither does Israel of today, Great Britain and the United States, realize the cause of their depression. Natural reactions have their cause in spiritual neglect. For every bad deed there is a punishment, just as the depression of today had its source in the spiritual decay of our age. But our nation does not seem to grasp that yet. So also did natural enemies like Assyria arise to carry out the divine judgment upon a godless people. As early as the reign of Ahab and Jehu, kings of Israel, we read, "In those days the Lord began to cut Israel short, and Hazael smote them in the coasts of Israel from Jordan eastward, all the land of Gilead, the Gadites, and the Reubenites, and the Manassites from Aror, which is by the river Arnon, even Gilead and Bashan." 2 Kings 10:32-33. From these words we may take it that it was during this period, about 900 to 800 BC, that the disintegration of the kingdom of Israel, or the Beth Sak, commenced. Beth Sak is the Phoenician name for the house of Isaac. The prophet Amos also calls them by the same name in chapter 7, verse 16. Likewise, it is of great interest and importance to us that on the Armana tablets, the Habaru, Habarai, or Abari, who conquered Palestine under Abdashara or Joshua, are also named the Saga or Sakamen, refer to the oldest letters in the world by Bristow, page 32. Thus it appears that Israel was their biblical name only, while their heathen neighbors and enemies spoke of them as Habaru and Habari and Saga or Sakai, sons of Sak or Isaac. That is one of the reasons why they were so easily lost to later historians. The real captivity of the Beth Sak began in 745 when Tiglath-Pileser came and took large portions of the tribes of Asher, Zebulun, Issachar, and Gad into Assyria, and recorded in 2 Kings 15:29. Now, there are many people who believe that Israel should be looked for in the east in the same place where they were lost. Those good people do not realize that it all depends upon whether the thing we lose has legs or not. If we have lost a knife or any other object, it is more than likely that the object is still where we dropped it. But if we have lost a dog, for instance, or a boy at a certain spot, the chances are that he will move away from there. And so it was with the lost tribes. They were a lively bunch, always gadding about and venturesome, ever pushing forwards towards the setting sun like all the Hebrew Phoenicians. The empire of Assyria was at the height of its power at the time it invaded Palestine, but rapidly declined after 185,000 of its soldiers perished in the siege of Jerusalem, as recorded in 2 Kings 19:35, and with its ending, the fortunes of the Sakgeloths, the prisoners of Isaac, naturally changed, for, according to prophecy, the eye of Jehovah was watching over them. Behold, the eyes of the Lord God are upon the sinful kingdom, and I will destroy it from off the face of the earth, saving that I will not utterly destroy the house of Jacob, saith the Lord. For lo, I will command, and I will sift the house of Israel among all nations, like as corn is sifted in a sieve, yet shall not the least grain fall upon the earth. Amos 9:8-9. In 720 BC, Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, invaded Israel and laid siege to its capital, Samaria, which fell after 3 years in 717 BC to Sargon II, successor to Shalmaneser. The account of this siege is given in 2 Kings 17:5-6 and 18:11. And the king of Assyria did carry away Israel into Assyria and put them in Halah and in Habor by the river Gozan and in the cities of Medes. A record of this fall of Samaria was found written on the walls of the palace of Sargon II at Nineveh, which reads, "In the beginning of my reign I besieged, I took by the help of the god Shamash, the city of Samaria. 27,280 of its inhabitants I carried away. I took them to Assyria and put into places people whom my hands had conquered. I set my officers and governors over them and laid on them a tribute as on the Assyrians. It was the Assyrian custom to take the inhabitants of a country and exchange them with those of another conquered territory. According to the Bible record, the Sakgeloths, or prisoners of Isaac, were taken to the river Gozan and into the cities of the Medes. Professor Hannay identifies the Gozan with the Uzan River that flows northward through the land of ancient Media into the Caspian Sea. The location of Israel's banishment was therefore 400 miles east of Nineveh and formed one of the outlying districts of the empire to which Israel was expected to pay tribute, but otherwise they were little molested. Professor Hannay believes that over 3 million Israelites were taken in all to Assyria, but this is probably exaggerated. We must also bear in mind that before Assyria could invade Israel, they had to go through and overcome the Hittite Empire, which came to an end 4 years after Samaria, after Karshemish was taken in 714 BC. As perhaps half of the population of the Hittites, the Cattai, were Israelites, we can readily see that a large number of Israelites went into Assyrian captivity and into the land of the Medes south of the Caspian Sea. Living there semi-independently for the next 100 years, those Sacs or Sakai, as they appear on various Eastern inscriptions, like the Bishtan rock, became the predominating element in media, just as their ancestors had been in Phoenicia. They, in fact, were the leaders in the Medic Wars of rebellion, first against Assyria and later against Babylon. For a period, it seems, the Sacs passed under the name of Manda, a title derived from one of their chieftains, and modern historians such as Professor Sayce believe now that it was one of those Manda or Sakai that Cyaxares was king. It was they who, under Cyaxares, joined with the Babylonians under Nabopolassar, marched against Nineveh in 606 BC and destroyed it after a 2-year siege, when the last Tsar of Assyria, Ashur-etililani, determined to perish in the flames of his capital and made a funeral pyre of his court. It was here that the people of Israel began to fulfill their divine destiny as God's battle axe, as we read in Jeremiah 51:20 and 21. Thou art my battle axe and weapons of war, for with thee will I break in pieces the nations, and with thee will I destroy kingdoms, and with thee will I break in pieces the horse and his rider, and with thee will I break in pieces the chariot and his rider. The power of Assyria had been the chosen medium to take Israel into captivity, but only a century later that power was destroyed by the sons of the prisoners that they took into captivity. After the fall of Ashur, the Sacs and Sakai became the dominant power in that region, and let it be noted at the very time that the kingdom of Judah ended in Palestine and went into Babylonian captivity, about that time a large host of the Sacs moved northward across the Araxes River and through the Caucasus Mountains into southern Russia, where they became known as the Scythians, the Latin term for the Greek word Scathai, for Sac-Galoth, meaning the prisoners of Sac. Some writers also speak of them as the Skolotoi. Before we follow the Sacs into Europe, let us devote a few pages to those of their brethren whom remained in Media. Professor Waddell, in his map of Eastern Asia, gives Western Media as the home of the Guti and Cattai, which name we have seen is a derivation of Gadel or Gad, and therefore either men of Gad or Judah or both, as we have seen before. These Guti or Cattai amalgamated with the Sacs, and together they formed the backbone of the growing power of Media. From a cylinder bearing the name of Cyrus, we learn that Gobryas, general of the Guti in the army of Cyrus, came against Babylon and took it in 536 BC. This was that memorial destruction of Babylon on the night of Belshazzar's feast, as told in the 5th chapter of Daniel. Here again, Israel played their predestined roles as God's battle axe. In the words of Jeremiah 51:24 and 25, 28 to 29, and I will render unto Babylon and to all the inhabitants of Chaldea all their evil that they have done in Zion in your sight, saith the Lord. Behold, I am against thee, O destroying mountain, saith the Lord, which destroyest all the earth, and I will stretch out mine hand upon thee, and roll thee down from the rocks, and will make thee a burnt mountain. Prepare against her the nations which the kings of the Medes, the captains thereof, and all the rulers thereof, and all the land of his dominion. And the land shall tremble in sorrow, for every purpose of the land shall be performed against Babylon, to make the land of Babylon a desolation without an inhabitant. For many years, Orientalists, could find no trace of this Babylonian Belshazzar and discredited the story of Belshazzar's feast until Sir Henry Rawlinson found an inscription at Ur asserting that near the end of his reign, Nabonidus, the last king of Babylon, associated Belshazzar, his eldest son, with him on the throne. Daniel 5:31 states that Darius the Mede took Babylon. This Darius is also a mysterious figure, as Cyrus was king of Medo-Persia when Babylon was taken, the word Darius being merely a title meaning lord or governor. Cyrus was succeeded by Cambyses in 529 BC, and the latter was succeeded by Darius Hastapes in 521 BC. He was the king during whose reign the temple was rebuilt, as told in the first chapter of Haggai. Even the Schofield Bible questions who this Darius is who took Babylon and suggests that he is Gabrias. If he is, then he is as chief of the Guti was an Israelite. If he is, then he as chief of the Guti was an Israelite who, as general for Cyrus, ended the power of Babylon. It appears, however, that Cyrus himself was defeated and killed by the Sakai in 529 BC. Herodotus and Diodorus tell us that Cyrus was killed by the Massagetei under the Queen Tamris on the Jaxaturus Getae, which is the Medic form of Guti or Katai, and likewise means wanderers or adventurers, and indeed such they were, wandering over Eastern Asia for centuries and later into Europe. Massagetei means, according to Professor George Rawlinson, great wanderers, and it was they who defeated Cyrus the Great when he attempted to invade their territory on the Jaxartes River east of the Oxus. Herodotus is stating that the Massagetei lived on the Araxes is mistaken about the river's location and means the Jaxartes. Just as the history of Greece or Hellas begins with a mythical age, so also has the history of Persia its mythical meaning. The early Persian literature of the Zendavesta is full of traditions of an heroic age with noble deeds and old-time chivalry. Accurate Persian history dates back to Alexander the Great, but previous to the legendary history goes back to the heroes of the Asia or Englai and the Sakai in the mythical stories of the Zendavesta, all of whom were our friends, the people of Israel, who, beginning about 700 BC, had spread themselves over the territory between the Caspian Sea, the Hindu Kush, and the Persian Gulf, and even as far north as the Jaxartes River, where they founded Samarkand, meaning New Samaria. This was the period of Zoroaster or Zarathustra, who was undoubtedly a Katai or Israelite and who introduced the Baal fire worship of the later Katai from the Phoenician homeland into Arena, the Persia of latter days. Zoroaster taught the existence of one God, the creator of all things, to whom all things belong. Zoroaster's faith was a religion of righteousness or Asha, from which is derived the word Asia. Like the Phoenicians, he and his followers worshiped God through his visible symbol, the sun, from which the Parsi religion developed, which still survives in India until today. The language of these Sakai of Zoroaster's time was the ancient Zend, in which the Avesta, the ancient lore, is written, as well as the Gathas, or sacred hymns. As the Sakai were Phoenicians, so also was their language, the Zend, a variation of it, which probably had survived in this district from the time that the earliest Aryans or Adamites came down from the mountains of the Hindu Kush 1800 years before. It was at this period, 700 to 600 BC, that the runic characters developed from the Phoenician script, which characters we find engraved in that region as far east as Lake Arel, where the Massagetei lived, and all across Russia to northern Germany, Scandinavia, England, and Iceland. In those runic characters, the sagas of the Sags and Goths were written, the Gathas of Zoroaster and the Eddas of the Norsemen, which again are derived from the earlier Vedas of the Indo-Aryans. All of the ancient sagas, though considered today only fictitious literature, contain the legendary lore of the heroes of ancient times who were the forefathers of the Goths and the Scythians, the Gatai or Guti of Turkland or Turkestan, and the Sacs of Sackland south of the Caucasus. There, in that region, south of the Caspian Sea, was the cradle of the so called Nordic races, and there also the cemetery of ancient Israel, where Israel disappeared from the pages of history. The Anglo Saxons and the Goths were born. An investigation into the origin of the Buddhist religion will show that it originated about 500 BC in the mountains of northern India among all people called the Sakyas. The name of Buddha himself is associated with that of Sakya. It is an open question whether a man by the name of Buddha ever existed. Some even associate him with the Odin of the Goths or with Thoth. Scholars believe that Buddhism is a survival of the early sun cult of the Aryans, as the word Buddha is derived from the Sanskrit root Buddha, Bud, to know or to awake. It expresses, therefore, the type of religion or philosophy that Buddhism is. What is of chief interest to us, however, is that the Sakyas of northern India, the people who were the originators of Buddhism, were a branch of our friends, the Sakai, Sogs, or Asa of Arena, who had crossed into northern India. Is it Ariana? I think it's Ariana. Or Asa of Ariana, who had crossed into northern India. Our frontispiece shows a reproduction of a rock carving near the city of Bhopal in India, known as the Topaz of the Sakai, dating from the 4th century BC. Not only the name of Sakai, but also the picture itself is of great interest to us. I've got to mark that or I will forget where it's at. See, and then when I do that, I lose my place. So, okay, Topaz of Sakai, dating from the 4th century, taken from the British History, traced by Roberts. Not only the name Sakai, but also the picture itself is of great interest to us. Below, we see a lion and a unicorn, which are the emblems of the whole house of Israel, the Lion of Judah, and the unicorn, the calf or eagle of the separated kingdom of Northern Ireland. Both figures are still on the British coat of arms. In the center, we see the shield of Britannia, or the Brits, or Covenant race, together with 2 tridents, the same as that held by Britannia on our plate 6. On one side hangs a double flag with the crosses of St. Andrew, and on the other a starry banner. Of all the ancient stone carvings, this is the most striking and of the greatest importance to us, for in it we can see that the original pattern for the Union Jack and the Star Spangled Banner was in the minds of our ancestors 23 centuries ago, and probably before that, not only in Europe, but in distant Asia. The Sakai again are mentioned on the Bestun rock inscription, wherein Darius the Great boasts that he had taken some of them as prisoners about 500 BC. One of the Sakai, shown on the stone carving by the name of Sakanua, wears the typical conical cap of the Goths or Scyths, as Darius was at that period ruler of the whole Medo-Persian Empire, extending from the Mediterranean to the Indus. The Sacs were, of course, citizens of his empire and continued so until 2 centuries later, when Alexander the Great invaded Persia. It was the Sacs or Gatai and the Scuts who gave him more trouble than any of the other people he had encountered, and during his invasion, many of them left their eastern homes and trekked around the Caspian Sea to join their kinsmen, the European Scythians. After the Battle of Ipsus in 301 BC, the whole of Persia fell under the sway of Seleucus, and when his kingdom broke up 50 years later, there arose a new power, Parthia, whose very name, identical to Parthi, Prat, or Brat, indicates that its people were of the covenant race of Israel, Israel, the Sakai, refer to Professor Waddell's explanation of the variant spellings of Brit, Brat, and Prot in Chapter 5. The Parthian revolt against the Greeks was headed by Arsaces, whose name, meaning the ruling sack, again proves who the leading element of Parthia were. It must be explained here that not all of the people of Ariana in those days were Sakai. No, indeed, the main population of that country was Hamitic and also Samaritans of Japhetic strain, and in the most eastern sections were even some Turarian or Mongolian people. But was the Sacs who started what but it was the Sacs who started what civilization that part of the world enjoyed, as they have likewise carried civilization to every other country. The Parthians were renowned as horsemen and archers. They were clad in mail, by which their steeds were also protected. Their military tactics were proverbial. For almost 3 centuries, the Parthian power extended its sway even into Syria, where they defeated a Roman army, but after 50 AD, their power declined for the good reason that the Sags, who had been the backbone of the nation, departed and followed their kinsmen into Europe. Since 600 BC, these wanderings of Israel into Europe had been in progress. After the fall of Nineveh in 606, the parent stock of the Sacs left their homes in Sackland and departed from Arsareth, taking the plunder of Nineveh with them. It is evidently this exodus that is spoken of in 2 Esther 13, 39, 46. And whereas thou sawest that he gathered another peaceable multitude unto him, those are the 10 tribes which were carried away prisoners out of their own land in the time of Hosea, the king, whom Salmansar, the king of Assyria, led away captive, and he carried them over the waters, and so came they into another land. But they took his counsel among themselves, that they would leave the multitude of the heathen, and go into a further country where never mankind dwelt, that they might keep their statutes, which they never kept in their own land. And they entered into the Euphrates by the narrow passages of the river, for through that country there was a great way to go, namely of a year and a half, in the same region is called Erisarath. Then dwelt they there till the latter time. And I gotta pause there, and I hate interrupting books. I hate it. But if I don't get this thought that I got out or written down or something, I'm going to forget it. And I don't want to forget it, because this reminds me of one of Jason's. It was a picture he put up, and it had 3 arrows, and it was showing, man, I'm not good at this, showing the Exodus. I'm going to find a picture and I'm going to put it up, and I'll probably start it at the beginning of this. And I just wanted to say, I think it relates to what I'm reading right now. I'm not about to try to explain it. I don't know. Maybe this book is explaining it, but I think it goes with it. If it doesn't, you can always let me know. I'll take it down. I'll never do that again. But I'm going to do that, and I didn't want to forget that, because I could have wrote it down, but then I would have fluffed up my readings. So I figured I'd just fluff up the whole reading the way like I just did and get it out this way. So, anyways, starting from their homeland in Sackland between the present Tabriz and the Caspian, they crossed the Araxes River and through a pass in the Caucasus migrated into the steppes of southern Russia, moving westward along the shores of the Black Sea as far as the Carpathian Mountains. From these mountains flows a river named Sereth, mentioned by Esdras, R, meaning river. The Sereth, like the Pruth, is a tributary of the Danube. The name Pruth is another variant of the Prat or Barat name of Israel. There, in the present countries of Moldavia and Bessarabia, they came into conflict with the Cimmerians, an earlier flock of Israel mentioned in the previous chapter, whom they drove westward into the present Germany. As the name Sith or Skuth is derived from Sak or Galoth, it appears that it was they who gave Scythia its name. Pliny says, the Sakai were among the most distinguished people of Scythia who settled in Armenia and were called Sakasani. Diodorus Siculus, the great historian of the time of Caesar, wrote of them, the Scythians, formerly an inconsiderable few, possessed a narrow strip on the Araxes, but by degrees they became powerful in numbers and in courage. A reading of the fourth book of Herodotus makes it clear that the people of Scythia were by no means of one and the same race. Some of them were agriculturalists and civilized, while others were Slavic and even Turanian, Turin, Turin, Turinin, Turinin, Turin, I can't say that word, Turanian nomads and savages. He says, for instance, the Sakai, who were Scyths, had on their heads caps, which came to a point and stood erect. They also wore loose trousers and carried bows, daggers, and battle axes. These Amagrian Scyths are called Sakai. The Scythians, I think that's it, told Herodotus that their nation had been in existence for 1,000 years previous to the invasion of Darius. If we date, therefore, 1,000 years backwards from the time of Darius, 515 BC, we arrive at 485 BC, the date of the Exodus when Israel was founded. This referred to what Herodotus called the royal Scythians, who considered the other tribes in the light of slaves. These lived on the Garus, a tributary of the present Dniester. Dniester? Herodotus includes among the Scythian tribes the Getai, who lived on the shores of the Danube, i.e., the Arsacereth of Esterus. Getai were. Getai, we have already seen, means merely wanderers, and such the Sakai were. Those Getai, as Herodotus tells us, believed in the immortality going after their death to Zalmoxis, which means nothing less than the God of Moses. So also was the country where the Getai lived, named Moesia, for in it lived the people of Moses. Many tamali have been found in southern Russia, some of whose interiors were built of white marble. In these were found chariots, pottery, jewelry, bracelets, gold, and precious stones of the finest workmanship and greatest abundance. The finest of those tumuli is that of Soloka in the Crimea, which served as a mausoleum for the Scythian kings for several centuries. This tomb contained magnificent furnishings of silver and gold. One of the royal skeletons found in it wore a heavy golden necklace with lion-headed ends. Couching lions are also very prominent on the exquisite repose work of solid gold adorning the walls and on the various gold and silver ornaments found, as well as on the handles and sheaths of the swords, which themselves were made of fine steel. The repose relief work pictured mostly battle and hunting scenes. On the repose relief work pictured mostly battle and hunting scenes. Wait a minute. The repose relief work pictured mostly battle and hunting scenes. On the repose relief work pictured mostly battle and hunting scenes, on which the warriors appeared in chainmail coats. It is also noteworthy that they are not bare-legged like the Greeks of that period were, but are wearing trousers. All the ornamental design is of most unusual excellence. Descriptions of this tomb, which dates of the 4th century BC, are found in the American Journal of Archaeology of 1914, volume 28, and in the Illustrated London News of January 3rd and February 14, 1914. Professor Hannay refers to the Hebrew manuscript found in one of those tamale, which reads, I am Jehudi, the son of Moses, the son of Jehudi the mighty, a man of the tribe of Naphtali, which was carried captive with the other tribes of Israel by the prince Shalmaneser from Samaria during the reign of Hosea, king of Israel. They were carried to Halah, to Harbor, which is Kabul, to Gozan, and to the Chersonese, which is in Crimea. This confirms the story of these wanderers of Siths, the people of Israel who were taken. Wait a minute. Is that how far I want to go? Give me a second. Yeah, the people of Israel who were taken to the river Gozan, the identical story of that found in 2 Kings, but it also tells us of the later wanderings to the Crimea. I think I'm going to stop there because it's going to start getting into plates. This is a long chapter, so make sure this is where you stop. All right, so yeah, this one might take me a 0.2 or 0.3. Hope you're having a good one. All right. Page 130. In the Crimea have also been found numerous ancient cemeteries with Hebrew Phoenician inscriptions on their tombstones. 700 of them have been deciphered by Professor Cholson of Petrograd. Our plate 21 gives us a photograph of one of them, but it will be noticed that the script is not the square Hebrew, but marks a transition from the Phoenician characters to the later Hebrew. The inscription is translated, reads, "This is the tomb of Buki, the son of Ichak, the priest. May his rest be in Eden at the time of the salvation of Israel, in the year 702 of the years of our exile. If we date the exile from the fall of Samaria in 717 BC, then the 702nd year of the exile would be 15 BC. Another inscription reads, to one of the faithful in Israel, Abraham ben Mar Sincha of Kerch, in the year of our exile, 1682, when the envoys of the Prince of Rush Meschek came from Cairo to our master Kaiser Prince David, Halma, Habor, and Gozan, to which place Tiglath-Pileser had exiled the sons of Reuben and Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, and permitted to settle there, and from which they have been scattered through the entire coast, even as far as China. This again corroborates our story of the wanderings of Israel and Saki, but the dating of 1682 years for the exile must refer to the founding of the nation at the time of the Exodus, 1486 BC, which would fix the date of the tombstone at 197 AD. It is very strange that when all of those inscriptions are there, telling of the sojourning of Israelites in southern Russia, that the scholars have paid no attention to them. But we may assume the main reason for this neglect is that as the Jews have passed for Israel, the scholars have assumed that those early Israelites were the ancestors of the Russian Jews. As the Russian Jews are descended from the Jews driven out of Spain 5 centuries ago, there is no connection between the present Jews of Russia and those early Israelites, whom the ancient writers call Sakasuni, Sakai, Guti, Getai, Sak, Geloths, Skuthai, Skoloti, and Scythians. Ptolemy mentions a Scythian race sprung from the Sakai called Saxons. They came, he said, from the country of the Medes. Aeschylus, the Greek poet, tells us the Sakai were noted for good laws and were preeminently a righteous people. Albinus said the Saxons were descended from the ancient Sakai of Asia, and that in process of time they came to be called Saxons. On the other hand, modern historians and every encyclopedia state that the Scythians were uncivilized barbarians using as drinking cups the skulls of their slain enemies. Such indeed most of them were, as Herodotus tells us, yet the contents of the tumuli of southern Russia, and particularly those of the royal tumulus of Solokha, proved by the ingenuity and workmanship of carvings and marvels, silver and gold, that their builders were something more than savages. If it is true that the Scythians left no ruins of cities behind them to tell of their existence, it must be remembered first that they were mostly agriculturists, and second, that such cities would have been leveled to the ground by the dreadful invasions of the Huns and other Turanian people that swept over Russia for centuries. When about 330 BC, Alexander the Great had conquered Macedonia and advanced northwards into the lands of the Danube, where the Getae dwelt, the latter evaded him and moved northwards across Europe to the shores of the Baltic. And it is there that Pytheas of Marcellus found them in the 3rd century BC and called them Gutonis. They called themselves Guta Thuda, meaning people of the Goths. Thus, by their name of Guta, they proved that they were the Guti, Katai, or Getai of Asia Minor. Mr. H. Bradley, in his work The Goths, writes, more than 300 years before the birth of Christ, a traveler from the Greek colony of Marcellus named Pythias made known to the civilized world the existence of a people called Gutans, who traded in the amber that was gathered on the Baltic shores. For 4 whole centuries, these amber merchants were heard of no more. Then, the elder Pliny, who died in the year AD 79, tells us that in his time they were still dwelling in the same neighborhood. In many respects, the career of this people is strikingly different from that of any other nation of equal historic renown. For 300 years, beginning with the days of Tacitus, their history consists of little else than a dreary record of barbarian slaughter and pillage. A century later, the Goths have become the mightiest nation in Europe. One of their kings sits on the throne of the Caesars, the wisest and most beneficent ruler that Italy has known for ages. The other reigns over Spain and the richest part of Gaul. We look forward 250 years and the Gothic kingdoms are no more. The nation itself has vanished from the stage of history, leaving scarcely a trace behind. In this relation, it is very important and interesting that in the Gothic epic of Beowulf, written about 1000 AD, the hero of the story, Beowulf, is a son of Ecgtheow, king of the Geats, or Getae. The poem also relates many particulars in the history of the royal houses of the Danes, Swedes, Angles, and Ostrogoths. Refer to Beowulf in Encyclopedia Britannica. The name of the Goths may have vanished from history, but not the people, at least not in Germany and Scandinavia, for another form of Gutans is Teutons, a study of the articles Teutones and Teutonic languages in the Encyclopedia Britannica will inform the reader that the Old Germans, Teutons, and Goths were one and the same family of people speaking the same language and believing in the same gods. It is unfortunate that since the World War, it has become fashionable with some English writers to denounce everything by the name of German and to disavow any relationship with them. One of those writers openly stating that he would hate to be related to the Germans. Such hate is unbecoming to a scholar and throws grave doubts upon the reliability of his work. Such an attitude could be excused during the heat of the war, but it is mischievous and unscientific to continue such propaganda. Even the Royal House of England has renounced the name of Queen Victoria's Prince Consort of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, a name which surely is Saxon and Gothic enough. If they renounce that name, why not also the name of Guelph, which is also German or Teutonic? The English, the German, the Dutch, and the Scandinavian languages are all branches of one central stem, the ancient Gothic, the early symbols of which were the runes and fothorks, which in turn are derived from the Aryan Phoenician, as Professor Waddell has shown, and as any study of the history of the alphabet will reveal. The gods of the Northmen are the same as those of the Saxons and Teutons. The Odin of the Norse is the Woden of the Angles and the Wotan of the Germans. Even the names of those days of the week are the same in German, English, and Scandinavian. Sunday devoted to the sun god, Monday to the moon god, Thursday to Thor, the god of thunder, Friday to Freya, and Saturday to Saturn. It is true that the Germans of today are not pure Saxon nor Gothic, but have a large mixture of Japhetic blood and the strain of Ishmael among them. But from the Elbe westward, the Saxon element predominates. It is tragic that Germany of today should go back to her ancient mythology, to the swastika, and even practice the rites of sun worship, but it establishes nevertheless the common ancestry of Teutons, Saxons, and Celts. The perusal of the Eddas, a collection of the ancient sagas of the Goths collected by Snorri Sturluson of the 12th century, tells us how Odin led the Asa, who called themselves a divine race, from the shores of the Black Sea through Russia into southern Scandinavia, where they became the aristocracy. It is from the Eddas that we learn of the gods of the ancient Asian men: Thor, Baldur, Frigg, Heimdall, Aegir, Freya, and the Valkyries. One of the sagas recites how God, disguised as a man named Rig, met on the seashore the first pair named Ai and Ida, and gave them the power of childbearing, and from them has sprung the race of the Thralls. Concerning the Eddas, Professor Waddell on page 73 of his Aryan Origin of the Alphabet writes, the runic letters of the Goths, British Scandinavians, and Anglo-Saxons, and used by Cadman or Caedmon, uniquely preserve very numerous archaic features of the Sumerian parents, which indicate far remoter and more independent origin than the Greek or Roman letters from which they have been supposed to be derived. This significantly confirms the vastly remote antiquity of the great Gothic epics which the runic writing enshrines, namely the Eddas. These Eddas, I find, are not mythological poems of Gothic gods, as hitherto supposed, through their mutilated and perverted Teutonic translations and paraphrases, but are the genuine historical Gothic tradition handed down in writing continuously through the ages on the rise of the Aryan Sumerians or Goths under King Heria, Thor or Arthur, and of their struggles and achievements in establishing the higher civilization in the ancient world. From chapter 6, we have already seen that Professor Waddell has shown that the Gothic Thor is derived from Dar in Indara, the Aryan name for Jehovah. Thor, therefore, is none other than the Gothic pagan name for Jehovah, and they made him the god of thunder and of justice. The Hebrew Phoenician inscriptions found in the Crimea and vicinity indicate that the Sakai who left those inscriptions there were not a heathen people and were conscious of their Israelitish descent, while on the other hand the mythology of the Goths shows that they were pagans. The enigma thus presented can only be explained by the fact that most of the Gothic sagas center around Odin, who, although made a deity in later years, was nevertheless a man and leader of the Aesir, Aeson, Asa, or Asia men, whose capital was at Asgard in Asaheim, where his castle, the Valhalla, was located. Odin's actual existence was in the last half of the 3rd century AD, as fixed by Anderson's Royal Genealogy and quoted by Milner in his Royal House of Britain. As Odin is the central figure of Germanic mythology, it appears therefore that Odin's saga itself cannot be much older than the 5th century AD. Odin's people, the Aesir, Asa, or Asia men, were the descendants of those Asa or Angli of Ariana, east of the Caspian Sea, whom we have seen previously were the Israelites who stayed in Media and became the civilizing element of that nation and district, the people who embraced the faith of Zoroaster, the religion of Asia, which gave Asia its name. Hold on. Okay. With the coming of those Asa, let me write that down. Just give me 1 second. I am not good at remembering after I read. So when I read something that seems important, I got to write it down. Not even to do anything with it, just to have those words somewhere in my field. With the coming of those Asa and Asen in about 200 BC began that mighty movement of people from Asia known as the Volkswanderung, which continued for centuries and hurled one wave after another of Asiatics, Israelites, Ishmaelites, Samaritan Slavs, and Mongolian Huns upon the countries of Europe and supplied Europe with the races she holds today. The mighty Asen broke the power of the royal Scythians and occupied their capital city of Gurus on the Dnieper, which became Asgard. The invasion of those Asa pushed the Sakai, or royal Scyths, into Germany, where they appear as the Saxons, who migrated north of the Carpathians through Cilicia into Saxony and the countries west of the Elbe, like Westphalia and Hanover. For about 4 centuries, those Asa or mighty Asen stayed in Assaland until the 3rd century AD, when under the leadership of Odin they started on the westward move again and headed straight along the shores of the Baltic to the North Sea coast, where they appear as the Angles. In their westward push, they came into contact with their cousins, the Getae or Goths, whom they scattered northwards into Goetaland or Sweden and southward into Germany. There are other people in Sweden besides the Goths. Some of the Donsk people or Danites settled there centuries before our era, and other Scythian tribes, but besides the Lapes of the extreme north, all the Scandinavians came from the cradle of humanity south of the Black and Caspian Seas. The so-called Nordic race did not originate in the north, but in Eastern Asia. The Nordic group is an important part of the Aryan race, but to that race also belong the Jews, whose features are derived from a strong infusion of Edomite blood. The present-day Jews are the descendants of those who escaped the Roman wars of AD 70 and 135. Mr. Hitler and his professors will yet find that out before long, and perhaps to their sorrow. However, our professors also know as little about our race as the Germans do about theirs, because for over a century our universities and seminaries imitated everything that the German skeptics thought, and now the whole intellectual world is bemuddled. Odin's people, the mighty Asa, consider themselves to be a divine race. Professor Waddell, in his Aryan Origin, states that in the Gothic runes, the letter A is pronounced Asa or Ace, meaning the one, or the first one. We still have the ace in a pack of cards. Now, in chapter 4, it was explained that our A is derived from the Phoenician letter Aleph, bull, which originally lay on its side as shown on plate 5, representing the horns of a bull and referring to the time when the fall equinox lunar in parentheses, lay in Taurus the bull, at which time the creation of Adam took place and the Adamic calendar began. We therefore find Adam as pictured on the Akkadian carving shown on plate 17, figure 2, wearing horns as a headdress. The meaning of it is that as the bull, Aleph, was the first of the constellations in Adamic chronology, so Adam also was the father of the Aryan race. The first one, the Ace or Asa, the holder of the birthright. This birthright was given to Abraham, the father of a ruling multitude, and it was upon Joseph and his two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, that the birthright was conferred by the dying Jacob. Hence, the symbol of that promise and of that tribe was a bull or unicorn. It is therefore not surprising that the people of Odin, the Asa or Angles, should in their homeland of Ariana, in Asaland, and also in North Germany, wear the horns of a bull as their headdress, either brazen helmets having the ears and horns of an ox, or else actually wear the horns of one as shown on pictures of Odin and his Asa or Angli. The prophet Hosea quite frequently speaks of the kingdom of Israel as Samaria or Ephraim, and because of their worship of the golden calf, they were cast off by Jehovah. Thy calf, Engel, O Samaria, hath cast thee off, we read in Hosea 8:5. The Hebrew for calf is Engel, and the calf, ox, or unicorn remained the heraldic sign of Ephraim in their captivity and wanderings. Hence, they passed under the name of Angli and Asa. Of Ephraim, it was said by Moses in the 33rd chapter of Deuteronomy, verse 17. His glory is like the firstling of his bullock, and his horns are like the horns of unicorns. With them he shall push the people together to the ends of the earth, and they are the 10,000s of Ephraim, and they are the thousands of Manasseh. Whether the Angli were conscious of that prophecy or not, we do not know, but at any rate, they love to dress up in their crude taste, looking like bulls and unicorns. Like bulls, they pushed their enemies. The name of John Bull is still attached to the Angles until this day, and the unicorn is still seen on the coat of arms of Great Britain, as it is seen on the rock carvings of the Sachi in India shown on our frontispiece. Before the coming of the Angles into northern Germany, there arrived another related tribe, that of the Juti, in the peninsula to the north of the Angli, who gave their country the name of Jutland. They were the Juti of Ariania. I want to say Ariana, Ariana, but I don't think it is. Arena, who were the descendants of the people of Judah, whom Sennacherib took into Assyria in the reign of Hezekiah, as related in 2 Kings 18:13. Professor Double D. Lookinbill, in his work Ancient Records of Assyria and Babylon, gives us the translation from the Taylor prism of Sennacherib's own record of his campaign against Judah. As for Hezekiah, the Jew, who did not submit to my yoke, 46 of his strong walled cities, as well as the small cities in the neighborhood, by escalade and by bringing up siege engines, by attacking and storming on foot, by mines, tunnels, and breaches, I took 200,150 people, great and small, male and female, horses, mules, asses, camels, cattle, sheep without number. I brought away from them and counted as spoil. Himself, like a caged bird, I shut up in Jerusalem, his royal city. Thus we see that over 200,000 Judites were taken into Assyria about 700 BC, while not half of that number of Jews were taken 100 years later into Babylonian captivity, from which only 40,000 returned. Those Jewish prisoners in Assyria moved east into the mountains of Central Asia as the Yoti, but when the great migration of peoples began into Europe about the time of Christ, they too followed the westward urge and finally settled in the Danish islands and in Jutland, or Judaland. They also took a preeminent part in the Anglo-Saxon invasion of England during the 5th century, and large numbers of those Jutes settled on the east coast of Scotland. As we have seen in chapter 10 and in the following chapter 12, that the Gaelic Irish Scot Highlanders of the west of Scotland were also of the tribe of Judah. It makes most of the people of Scotland belong to that tribe. This would explain then the close character of the canny Scotch and the Jews, as illustrated in the following antecedent. The Scotchman and the Jew met at the beach, and each boasted that he could stay under water longer than the other. So they finally made a bet. He who came up first would have to pay a shilling, but neither won the bet. Both were drowned, for neither would risk the shilling. During the 1st century, BC, Rome was the mistress of the world, but not even Caesar attempted to extend his dominions into Germany, the land of the Teutons. When about 6 A.D. Varus, the Roman general, invaded Germany, he got only as far as Westphalia. Hermann, or Arminius, a Saxon chieftain, united the German tribes and destroyed the Roman army consisting of 3 legions in 9 A.D. in the forest of Teutoburg. This was one of the decisive battles of history, and Rome was compelled to relinquish her grip on Germany. It was the second time that Israel, God's battle axe, came into collision with the Fourth World Empire of Daniel and checked the expansion of the empire. That victory over the Roman legions is commemorated in a gigantic monument, 170 feet in height, crowned by the figure of Arminius with drawn sword, erected in 1875 near the German city of Detmold in Westphalia, shown on plate 21. After the defeat, the Romans kept on the left bank of the Rhine, but the Teutons soon followed them there, and great campaigns took place during the next century. In one battle, 80,000 Romans were slain, and in 103 BC, 300,000 of the Teutons in 2 great battles of Aix and Milan. To produce armies that could sustain such wars as these, writes Major de Welden in his Origin of the English, the country of the Teutons must have covered a very large area of the German and Russian forests. It is scarcely likely that about the same period and in much the same country there would be 3 separate peoples called by such similar names as Gutens, Teutons, and Jutons. However, the great Gothic invasions of the Roman Empire did not come until the 4th century and were caused by the sons of the mighty Odin, who became the chieftains of the various Teutonic tribes and thus founded the confederacy of the Visigoths, or Western Goths. Odin himself retired northward into Denmark and southern Sweden, where he died. Odensee in Denmark still commemorates his coming. The Reverend Milner, in his genealogical chart, shows that Odin was a descendant of Priam, king of Troy, and thus also of the house of Judah, Zara. Like Gollum, the conqueror of Ireland, and Brutus, Milner's authorities are the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles, the Icelandic Landafagagatal, and the Herald's College MS. The later MS tells that Odin in 250 AD married Freya, the daughter of Cadwaladr, king of Silura, and also of the line of Brutus. From the sons of Odin and Freya is descended Rurik, the founder of the Russian Empire in 840, the House of Wettin that has furnished the royal families of Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Saxony, and Coburg Gotha, and the House of Galef, to which belong the House of Hanover, Brunswick, Lüneburg, Mecklenburg, Bavaria, and a host of other German noble families. Thus we see how Judah has furnished the scepters for Israel. It appears, however, that a body of the Baltic Goths separated before the coming of Odin and moved southward, back to their former home along the Danube, where they appeared as the Ostrogoths under their king Ostrogotha. From Ostro, the name of Austria is derived. For a century, the Roman Empire stood against the Gothic invasion, the reason being that Christianity was spreading rapidly at that time in southern Europe. Wolfalia, nope, Wolfala spread it from Constantinople, where he translated the Bible into Gothic. But many centuries were yet to pass before the northern Gothic peoples, the Saxons, Jutes, and the Angles, should hear of Jesus Christ. In Sweden, Odin was deified, and the faith in him continued there until the 11th century AD. The reason why the north of Europe did not accept Christianity for centuries later was the invasion of the Huns, who drove a wedge between the Gothic nations of the north and south. The Huns penetrated Europe as far west as northern France until 451. Their power was ended in the Battle of Cologne by the combined Roman and Gothic armies under Theodoric. At the death of Theodosius in 395, the Roman Empire was divided by his two sons. Arcadius became the emperor of the east and Honorius emperor of the west, but shortly after the Visigoths rose in rebellion and chose Alaric as their king. But shortly after the Visigoths rose in rebellion and chose Alaric as their king, period. In 400 AD, they besieged Italy but were repulsed. A second invasion in 408 was more successful. Rome was besieged and taken and plundered by the Goths. From this blow, Rome never recovered, and from that time forward rapidly declined, and that mortal blow was again delivered by the people of Israel, the Goths, who fulfilled their divinely appointed mission to break in pieces the nations. 3 of the 4 empires in the vision of Daniel, referred to the 7 times chapter 3 by the author, had been broken by the people of the Stone Kingdom. That of Babylon by Gobrus, and the Guti, that of Alexander by the Parthians, and now the 4th empire, Rome, began to crumble under the blows of the Stone Kingdom of Israel. The Romans, hard-pressed by rebellion and the wars with the Goths, recalled their garrisons from Britain, where they had been since the invasion under Claudius in the 1st century AD. The Western Roman Empire ended with the death of Romulus Augustulus in 476 AD, and Papal Rome arose, as discussed in the 7 times of prophecy by the author. But the nations of the Goths did not last very much longer either. Intertribal wars with the Lombards and the Franks, who were nothing else than different divisions of Israel at that time, disintegrated the Gothic power, which disappeared from history in the 8th century in Spain. Only the Spanish nobility are still proud of their descent, and so were the Huguenots of France, who refused to bow their necks to the power of Papal Rome. Israel was not to be established on the continent of Europe, although there are millions of people on that continent today who are of the stock of Israel. The Stone Kingdom was to be established in the Isles of the West. All right. Good. Long chapter. Where was I? From chapter X, 10, we have already seen that Ireland had been settled by Danites and the Galileos of Judah, and whom developed that splendid race, the Irish Scots. From chapter 9, we have learned of the coming of Brutus and his Brits that gave Albion her new name, the Covenant Land, Britain. For 1,000 years, British civilization developed. It was to this covenant land that the kingdom was transferred in the same year that it was taken from the Jews in Palestine, as our Lord had foretold in Matthew 21:43. Therefore say I unto you, the kingdom of God shall be taken from you and given to a nation, bringing forth the fruits thereof. In the year 36 AD, the 70 weeks that were determined upon Daniel's people, the Jews, to finish their transgression was completed. In 36 AD, after the Jews had finally rejected the preaching of the gospel and had stoned Stephen to death, Paul was converted and commissioned to carry the gospel to Israel and the Gentiles. The kingdom was taken from the Jews, and in the very same year was established in Britain when Joseph of Arimathea founded the first Christian church in Glastonbury, England. The Reverend R. W. Morgan, Welsh antiquarian and scholar, states on page 111 of his book, St. Paul in Britain, Christianity was first introduced into Britain by Joseph of Arimathea, AD 36 to 39, followed by Simon Zelotes the Apostle, then by Aristobulus, the first bishop of the Britons, then by St. Paul. Its first converts were members of the royal family of Siluria, that is, Gladys, the sister of Caradoc, Gladys, Claudia, and Urgin, his daughters. Linus, his son, converted in Britain before they were carried into captivity to Rome. Then Caradoc, Bran, and the rest of the family converted at Rome. The two cradles of Christianity in Britain were Ynius, Windrin, the Crystal Isle, translated by the Saxons, Glastonbury in Somersetshire, where the earliest churches and schools next to Ynius, Windrin were founded by the Silurian dynasty. Ynius Windrin was also commonly known as Ynius Avalon, and in Latin, Dominus Dei, Secretum Dei. Again, he says on page 123, Joseph and his company, including Lazarus, Mary, Martha, Marcella, and Maximin, came at the invitation of certain Druids of high rank from Marcellus into Britain. Circator AD 38 or 39 were located at Ynius Avalon, the seat of a Druidic corps, which was subsequently made over to them in free gift by Arvagarigus. Here they built the first church, which became the center and mother of Christianity in Britain. Here also they terminated their mortal career, the gentle and conciliatory character of Joseph securing the protection of the reigning family and the conversion of many of its members. Joseph died and was interred AD 76. The founding of the first church in Europe is also confirmed by numbers of scholars from Eusebius, Bishop of Caesarea, to Archbishop Usher, the compiler of our Bible chronology. Only a few I can quote here. Gildas, the British historian of the 6th century, tells us, "We know that Christ, the true Son, offered his light to our island in the last year of Tiberius Caesar. The Church of Avalon in Britain no other hands than those of the disciples of our Lord themselves built. Publius Discopius. The mother church of the British Isles is the Church of Insula Avalonia, called by the Saxons Glastonbury, Bishop Usher. If credit be given to ancient authors, this church of Glastonbury is the senior church of the world, Bishop Fuller. It is certain that Britons received the faith in the first age from the first source of the world. Of all the churches whose origin I have investigated in Britain, the Church of Glastonbury is the most ancient. Sir Henry Spilman, Capellus, in his History of the Apostles, says, "I scarcely know of one author from the time of the fathers downward, and who does not maintain that Paul, after his liberation, preached in Western Europe, Britain included." Of St. Paul's journey to Britain, writes Bishop Barres, we have as satisfactory proof as any historical question can demand. A copy of the Acts of the Apostles in the Turkish archives at Constantinople contains 29 chapters, one more than the book of Acts in our Bible. This 29th chapter states, verses 1 to 10, "And Paul, full of the blessings of Christ and abounding in the Spirit, departed out of Rome, determining to go into Spain, for he had a long time purposed to journey thitherwards, and he was minded to go from thence into Britain. For he had heard in Phoenicia that certain of the children of Israel about the time of the Assyrian captivity had escaped by the sea to the isles afar off, as spoken by the prophet and called by the Romans Britain. and the Lord has commanded the gospel to be preached far hence to the Gentiles and to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And no man hindered Paul, for he had testified boldly of Jesus before the tribunes, and among the people. And he took with him certain of the brethren which abode with him at Rome, and they took shipping at Ostium, and having the winds fair, were brought safely into an haven of Spain. And much people were gathered together from the towns and villages and the hill country, for they had heard of the conversion of the apostle and the many miracles which he had wrought. And Paul preached mightily in Spain, and great multitudes believed and were converted, for they perceived he was an apostle sent from God. And they departed out of Spain, and Paul and his company, finding a ship in Armorica sailing into Britain, they went therein, and passing along the south coast, they reached a port called Raphinius. Now when it was noised abroad that the apostle had landed on their coast, great multitudes of the inhabitants met him, and they treated Paul courteously. And he entered in at the east gate of their city, and lodged in the house of an Hebrew and one of his own nation. And on the morrow he came and stood upon Mount Lud, and the people thronged at the gate and assembled in the broad way, and he preached Christ unto them, and many believed the word and the testimony of Jesus Christ. And at even the Holy Ghost fell upon Paul, and he prophesied, saying, Behold, inhabitants thereof shall be numbered, and in the 70th numbering of the people their eyes shall be opened, and the glory of their inheritance shine forth before them. And nations shall come up to worship on the mount that testifieth of the patience and long-suffering of a servant of the Lord. It is strange how our scholars and theologians can ignore all those evidences from so many different sources and have managed to keep them from the people. Various writers have listed the authorities that testified to the establishment of the church in Britain in the 1st century A.D., such as Colonel McKendrick in his God's Commonwealths, the Reverend Lionel Lewis, vicar of Glastonbury, in his Joseph of Arimathea at Glastonbury, and the Reverend Morgan already quoted. Archbishop Usher quotes 20 authorities on the same question. Despite the Roman occupation of the land, Christianity spread rapidly over England. Hundreds of churches and several bishoprics were established. At the Council of Arles in 314 AD, 3 bishops from Britain attended. Constantine, the Roman Christian emperor, was born in Britain of a godly mother, Helena. I have already quoted in the 9th chapter the inscription in the Church of St. Peter upon Cornhill in London, which tells us that the church was founded in the year of our Lord 179. From the annals of the Cathedral of Winchester, we learn that in AD 169 there stood on a portion of the site of the present minster an early British church. 226 AD, the British church was transformed into a pagan temple during the Roman occupation. 293 AD, a second Christian church was erected during the reign of Emperor Constantine, whose son was for a time a monk in the adjoining monastery. 825 to 60, this church was enlarged by Saint Swithin and was restored by King Alfred the Great and by Saint Ethelwulf after raids by the Danes. All the evidences testify that a large portion of the Britons were Christian people, and even J.R. Green in the History of England tells us of the destruction of the British churches from the North Sea to the Severn Valley by the Angles. Yet modern historians willfully overlook early British Christianity and tells us that St. Augustine was the first to preach the gospel in England. In this, they are only partially right. Augustine was the first to convert the invading Angles to Christianity, after the invaders had massacred most of the Christian Britons, except in Wales, where the Angles never entered. We may wonder why that early flame of Christianity was almost extinguished in England, but there was a reason for it. The main body of the tribe of Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh, the holders of the birthright blessings given in Genesis 49, 22 to 26, had not yet arrived. The Angles, the people of the bull that gave England her name. When in the 4th century the Roman garrisons were withdrawn from Britain, the savage Picts from Scotland invaded the land and plundered it. The Christian Britons asked 2 Saxon warriors, Hengist and Horsa, and their men to help them in evicting the Picts. But those Saxons and Angle warriors outstayed their welcome, finding that England was a pleasant land with fields and green pastures, and turned on their British hosts and invited their kinsmen in North Germany to come and help themselves, which they did. For a century, from 449 to 557 AD, the conquest of Britain and its people continued with savage fury. The invaders, the mighty Asa, or Angles, launched themselves upon the Britons and their peaceful homes and churches, and when the Briton had almost been exterminated or driven into Wales and the surrounding isles, as for instance Iona, Britain had become England, the land of the Angles. The race that came to Britain was the race of the Angles, not the Anglo-Saxons, a term only introduced from the continent after the Northman conquest. The name given to the country was England, i.e. Angleland. The church was Anglican. There were subdivisions named East Saxons, West Saxons, etc., but these were merely territorial designations brought by the Angles from their German localities. An inhabitant of Wessex would call himself indifferently either a West Saxon or an Angle, but none of the Anglo kingdom called himself a Saxon, writes Major B. de Weldon in his Origin of the English. There are very few names in England connected with the Saxon name. Most of the Saxons remained in Germany, northern France, Switzerland, and Scandinavia, where their descendants still are. The term Saxon belongs to the whole house of Israel. For in Isaac shall thy seed be called or named. Scripture tells us in Genesis 21:12 and Romans 9:7, they were to be called the sons of Isaac and have been so through the centuries. The Beth Sak, Sakai, Sake, Sakasani, Sakanis, Sakasen, and Saxons. All the Angles were Saxons, and so were the Danites, Catai, Getai, or Goths, and even the Brits. But it was the Angles who gave England her name, in the same way that the Covenant race, the Barats, or Brits, previously gave Britain her name. England became the mother, and we all speak English. In Exodus 19:5, we read, if ye will obey my voice indeed and keep my covenant, then ye shall be a peculiar treasure unto me above all people. For all the earth is mine. And in the 31st chapter of Jeremiah, verse 9, Jehovah declares, Ephraim is my firstborn. In the parables of the kingdom presented in the 13th chapter of Matthew, our Lord declares in the 44th verse, again, the kingdom of heaven is like unto treasure hid in a field. The 38th verse declares that the field is the world. To this, the Scofield Bible makes the following explanation. Our Lord is the buyer at the awful cost of his blood, 1 Peter 1:19, and Israel, especially Ephraim, Jeremiah 31:5-12, 18-20, the lost tribes hidden in the field, the world. Verse 38 is the treasure, Exodus 19:5. I hate when it does that. I'm going to put this in there. It's going to all get put in probably today. So I'm going to go back, and sometimes I'm going to read these parentheses, and sometimes I won't if it detracts, and it's all right, but man, if it's going to be up on the screen, man, I don't want to mess with it. So I'll try to keep it in there, but until my tongue can work it all in correctly, you're just going to have to work with me. Where was I? And Israel, especially Ephraim, the lost tribe hidden in the field. The world is the treasure. Israel, especially Ephraim, was the treasure hid in the field and was the nation to whom the kingdom was given when it was taken from the Jews. And from England the kingdom has spread and the gospel has been preached, particularly since the time of the Great Reformation. Of course, it's all over now. Whenever the Anglo-Saxons have gone, Christianity has gone with them. 28,000 of the 30,000 foreign missionaries that were in the field a few years ago spoke the English tongue. The rest spoke German and Scandinavian. The British and the Foreign Bible Society has printed the word in over 700 languages. The Society and the American and German Bible Societies are the ones that have spread the scriptures. So far, we have spoken only of the lost tribes of Israel, but there is another tribe that belongs to Israel also, that of Benjamin, who was loaned to Judah as a light bearer, as seen in 1 Kings 11:36 and 12:21. Benjamin went with Judah into the Babylonian captivity in 590 and 80 to 85. About 60 years later, after the capture of Babylon by Cyrus and the army of the Guti, the people of Judah and Benjamin were set free, but very few of them returned to Jerusalem. Only 42,000 of them as given by Ezra. Josephus says that only the lowest of the low, the poor in health and knowledge and in ancestry, the very outcast and refuse of the nation, went back to Palestine. These people were the Jews, which word is derived from Yehudim, meaning, according to Josephus, the remnant of Judah. Neither are these Jews pure Israelites, for during their stay in Palestine, they intermarried with the masters of Palestine, the Edomites, the Edomenes, and Syrians, and took on the dark complexion and features of those people. Generally, the Israelites were tall and fair, the cream of the Aryan race, as we find them in the Irish Scots, the pure English, and the Norwegians, while the Jews, the hue of the continents doth white witness against them. As Isaiah said, the Jews were to be a reproach and a proverb, a taunt and a curse in all places whither I shall drive them, according to Jeremiah. So they have been. Nevertheless, our doctors of divinity have given them a halo which the Bible does not give them. The mass of the people of Judah and Benjamin remained in Media. The descendants of Judah we have already identified with the Ute or Utes of Uteland. H.B. Hannay shows good reasons to believe that the Galatians of Asia Minor were the people of Benjamin, who had escaped from Babylon and Media. The word Galatia being derived from Golgotha, Babylonian, for prisoners. It is also known that the Galatians of Christ's time were Benjamites and must have been later immigrants into Palestine, for the Jews would have little to do with them. They also spoke a different dialect from the Jews, and among the Galatians our Lord spent most of his time. 11 of his disciples were Galilean fishermen, and only one was a Jew, Judas. At Christ's ascension, an angel addressed his disciples and called them, ye men of Galilee. An examination of Paul's epistle to the Galatians shows that they were Israelites. Professor Max Mueller, in his lecture on the science of language, said, the Goths made a raid from Europe to Asia, Galatia, and Cappadocia, and the Christian captives whom they carried back to the Danube were the first to spread the light of the gospel among the Goths. It is certain that when the Ostrogoths left the Baltic in the 3rd century AD for the Balkans, they were pagans, and it appears, therefore, that Wulfila, the bishop of the Goths and translator of the Bible into Gothic, was one of the captives from Cappadocia, and as such a Benjamite. Professor Waddell states that he came from Cappadocia. Now, it has already been told in chapter 6 that the legend of St. George had its origin in Cappadocia. Professor Hannay, in his European Race Origin, tells us that a group of those Benjamites left Pontus in Cappadocia about 300 AD in boats and started on a long voyage through the Mediterranean and along the western coast of Europe and landed finally in the fjords of Norway, where they appear as Vikings. Their emblem was a wolf, which was also the emblem of Benjamin, to whom his dying father Jacob said in Genesis 49:29, Benjamin shall raven as the wolf. In the morning he shall devour the prey, and at night he shall divide the spoil. If those Benjaminites ever heard of the gospel, they certainly must have slid from grace, for as Vikings they soon became the terror of northern Europe, living by piracy for centuries. In the 9th century, the Vikings invaded northwestern France under Rolf I, Duke of Normandy, and rapidly mixed with the population, accepted Christianity, adopted the French language, and became the Normans. when those Normans under William the Conqueror invaded England and defeated the English in the Battle of Hastings, 1066 AD, all the tribes of Israel were regathered in the covenant land. The Normans brought the French language with them. It, together with the Gothic and the early English tongue, made our English as it is today. In the so-called Saxon conquest by the Angles in the 5th century AD, most of the speaking Britons were exterminated or made slaves by the invaders. Speaking of England only, but the Norman invasion was not as barbarous. It therefore required almost 2 centuries before the Angles became reconciled to the Norman conquerors, but by the end of the 13th century, all the different tribal elements had been welded into one people. There is a prophecy in the 6th chapter of Hosea, verses 1 and 2, which reads, "Come and let us return unto the Lord, for he hath torn, and he will heal us. He hath smitten, and he will bind us up. After 2 days will he revive us, and the 3rd day he will raise us up, and we shall live in his sight. As a day is with the Lord as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as 1 day," says the good book, and gives us thereby the time scale for those 3 days in Hosea. For 2 days Israel is presented as torn and smitten, and so indeed they were during their captivities and wanderings. But with the beginning of the 3rd day, the Lord will rise them up. If we date 2,000 years from the fall of Samaria in 717 BC, we arrive at 1284 AD, which marks the beginning of the 3rd day. In that very year, Prince David of Wales was executed and the Welsh resistance broken. Wales became a part of England with English institutions and laws. A few years later, a Scottish rebellion took place. Edward I of England marched northward and invaded Scotland as far north as Aberdeen, taking most of the great castles of the Scottish chieftains, and at Montrose accepted I can't say that word, Ball Isles surrender of the crown of Scotland. When England came home to England, when Edward came home to England, he brought with him the famous it's not coronation. Yes, it is. The famous coronation stone from Scone, upon which the kings of Scotland and Ireland had been crowned for 1,500 years. Thus we see that under Edward's reign, Wales and Scotland and England became one, although the Scots kept rebelling for several centuries. Then indeed was fulfilled that other prophecy of Hosea 3, 4, and 5. In the same way, the children shall stay for a long time without a king, and without a leader, and without a sacrifice, and without a capital, and without an ephod or teraphim. At last the children of Israel will return and seek the Lord their God and David their king, and reverence the Lord and his beneficence in the future ages. Fenton, Bible in Modern English. From that time onward, the house of Israel has had a king and a capital again. When the stone of Jacob was transferred into Westminster, as centuries ago it had been in the Eastminster, in Solomon's temple at Jerusalem. The 13th century marked indeed the restoration of Israel's national unity. At its opening, the English barons demanded from King John a recognition of all freemen's rights and a restoration of the ancient laws of the Britons and Saxons was drawn up in the Magna Carta of the 15th of June, 1215, which has been the foundation of British liberty, law, and justice ever since. However, those laws were nothing new, for we had their original in the Mosaic Law of Israel. Edward in his reign followed a policy of domestic consolidation and financial as well as legal reforms that has shed much luster upon his region, and which made his time almost the most important epoch in the constitutional history of England. 2,000 years before, in Palestine, Israel had been one nation. Then they were torn, smitten, and scattered. But now they were united again. Celt, Saxon, Anglo, and Norman have made Great Britain what she is today, and that race has made the United States of America. All right. Chapter 12, The Throne of David. As the object of this book is to trace the ancestors of the race that forms the backbone of the people of the United States of America, it may appear superfluous at first thought to deal with the throne of David. Yet, as too many readers, the very thought and thread of this book is revolutionary from hitherto held conceptions, so also will be to them the subject of the throne of David. Besides, many readers will find that they themselves belong to the house of David. This is an age of wonders, so don't be surprised at anything that is going to be discovered or brought to light these days. These are great days, despite the depression, and greater days are yet in store for many of us, but I am not so sure whether for all of us. In our 9th chapter, dealing with Brutus, we have already studied the foundations of the house of Judah. According to 1 Chronicles 2, 3, and 4, Judah had 5 sons: Er, Onan, Shelah, Pharez, and Zerah. But a reading of the 38th chapter of Genesis makes it clear that Er and Onan died childless, and the 19th verse of the 26th chapter of Numbers confirms it. This chapter gives us the roster of the people of Israel who entered the land of Canaan and tells us in verses 20 to 22 that the descendants of the other 3 sons of Judah numbered 76,500 people. These people constitute the tribe of Judah, but not the Jews. The Jews were the remnant that came out of Babylonian captivity. It seems that our theologians have studied the Bible backwards instead of forwards, because the ancestors of the Jews were the tribe of Judah, which was one of the tribes of Israel. Does not make all the Israels Jews, yet such a naive idea is held even by the most modern of our theologians and educators, and the only authority they have for it is that their Sunday school teachers said so and their grandmothers. Many Americans are descended from Irish stock, but that would not make the people of old Ireland 5 or 10 centuries ago Americans, would it? It is strange that even our modern highbrows are so illogical in this respect and still hold to very primitive ideas. The first chapter of Matthew gives us the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, who came of the line of Pharez, Hezron, Aram, Boaz, and Jesse. David was the second king of Israel, and Solomon was the last. After the separation of the kingdom of Judah from Israel in 970 BC, the house of David ruled only over the house of Judah, while Israel had kings of divers houses. Zedekiah was the last Davidic king of Judah. His 2 sons were killed before his eyes. Then his own eyes were put out, and he was taken to Babylon as a prisoner by Nebuchadnezzar in 584 BC, as told in the 25th chapter of 2 Kings. Was that the end of the throne of David? Orthodox Bible students tell us that it was, and that the throne was vacant and will be vacant until Christ returns again to occupy it. But the promise was, the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh come, and until him shall the gathering of the people be. This promise was made by the dying Jacob in the 10th verse of the 49th chapter of Genesis. Oh, how little faith even Orthodox Bible students have had in the promises of the Scriptures. If Shiloh refers here to the Messiah's first coming, then that promise was only a fairy tale indeed, for nobody has held that scepter from the time of Zedekiah until Christ. Besides that, dang it, scepter was a literal scepter, and Christ's scepter has been a spiritual one. Scepter was at least until today. Sorry about that. Orthodox Bible students, in their eagerness to hold up Christ, have also done him a great deal of harm when they allow their wishes to outrun the statements of Scripture concerning temporal matters. The Old Testament is first of all a historical record of the people of Israel and a prophetical forecast of their destiny, and those who question that, whether they be modern critics or Orthodox believers, if they spiritualize whatever is possible, have done untold harm to the old book. Ought ye not to know that the Lord God of Israel gave the kingdom over Israel to David forever, even to him and to his sons by a covenant of salt? 2 Chronicles 13:5. If our Orthodox friends believe that these are God's words, then I would like to ask them how much of this promise they really do believe. The word says David shall rule over Israel forever, but unfortunately it did not say where so the faithful could see it. Again, in 1 Kings 9:5, Jehovah promises, then I will establish the throne of thy kingdom upon Israel forever, as I promised to David thy father, saying, there shall not fail thee a man upon the throne of Israel. In the 89th Psalm, Jehovah establishes his covenant with David and his house forever. I have made a covenant with my chosen. I have sworn unto David my servant, thy seed will I establish forever, and build up thy throne to all generations. Selah, I have found David my servant with my holy oil. Have I anointed him, with whom my hand shall be established. Mine arm also shall strengthen him. The enemy shall not exact upon him, nor the son of wickedness afflict him. And I will beat down his foes before his face, and plague them that hate him. But my faithfulness and my mercy shall be with him, and in my name shall his horn be exalted. I will set his hand also in the sea, and his right hand in the rivers. Also I will make him my firstborn higher than the kings of the earth. My mercy will I keep for him forevermore, and my covenant shall stand fast with him. His seeds also will I make to endure forever, and his throne as the days of heaven. If his children forsake my law and walk not in my judgments, if they break my statutes and keep not my commandments, then will I visit their transgression with the rod, and their iniquity with stripes. Nevertheless, my loving kindness will I not utterly take from him, or suffer my faithfulness to fail. My covenant will I not break, nor alter the thing that is gone out of my lips. Once have I sworn by my holiness that I will not lie unto David. His seed shall endure forever, and his throne as the sun before me. It shall be established forever as the moon, and as a faithful witness in heaven. Selah. As long as the sun endures, so long shall the covenant last. And as the sun has been shining every day since David's time, the covenant must be still in force, and the house of David must still be ruling over Israel. Many of the higher critics of the Bible, from Tom Paine to Bob Ingersoll, have challenged the Orthodox defenders of the Bible to show them where and how the Davidic covenant has been fulfilled, but Orthodox theology has never been able to show where except in heaven. Yet the covenant reads, if his children forsake my law and walk not in my judgment, then will I visit their transgression with the rod, and their iniquity with stripes. This cannot be applied to Jesus Christ, who is perfect and who died for our transgressions, and I don't think it can apply to those who are in heaven. It can only apply to David's literal sons throughout the ages. Sorry, allergies. And the word of the Lord came unto Jeremiah, saying, thus saith the Lord, if ye can break my covenant of the day and my covenant of the night, and that there should not be day and night in their season, then may also my covenant be broken with David my servant, that he should not have a son to reign upon his throne, and with the Levites the priests, my ministers. As the host of heaven cannot be numbered, neither the sand of the sea measured, so will I multiply the seed of David my servant, and the Levites that minister unto me. Moreover, the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah, saying, considerest thou not what this people have spoken, saying, the two families which the Lord hath chosen, he hath even cast them off. Thus they have despised my people, that they should be no more a nation before them. Thus saith the Lord, if my covenant be not with day and night, and if I have not appointed the ordinances of heaven and earth, then will I cast away the seed of Jacob and David my servant, so that I will not take any of his seed to the rulers over the seed of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. For I will cause their captivity to return and have mercy on them. Jeremiah 33:19-26. What about it, earnest Bible students? If you really believe that Jehovah uttered these solemn words, then it is your sacred duty to prove to an unbelieving world of skeptics and agnostics where, when, and how those words have been verified. The answer is given in 2 Samuel 7:8-16. Now, therefore, so shalt thou say unto my servants David, thus saith the Lord of hosts, I took thee from the sheepcote, from following the sheep, to be ruler over my people over Israel, and I was with thee whithersoever thou wentest, and shit have no damn and have cut off all thine enemies out of thy sight, and have made thee great name, like unto the name of the great men that are in the earth. Moreover, I will appoint a place for my people Israel, and will plant them, that they may dwell in a place of their own, and move no more. Neither shall the children of wickedness afflict them any more, as before time, and as since the time that I commanded judges to be over my people Israel, and have caused thee to rest from all thine enemies. Also the Lord telleth thee that he will make thee an house, and when thy days be fulfilled, and thou shalt sleep with thy fathers, I will set up thy seed after thee, which shall proceed out of thy bowels, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be his father, and he shall be my son. If he commit iniquity, I will chasten him with the rod of men, and with the stripes of the children of men. But my mercy shall not depart away from him, as I took it from Saul, whom I put away before thee, and thine house and thy kingdom shall be established forever. We have already seen that the appointed place was the covenant land in Britain, in the Isles of the West, and it was there, as we shall find, that the throne of David was established a few years after it was thrown down in Jerusalem. The king is dead. Long live the king. The king never dies. He only demises the throne. These slogans are as old as history, and even older. They go back to Adam and his dynasty, which ruled for 930 years. Genesis 5:5. Only 31 golden cycles of 30 solar years each. At the end of each cycle, the dynasty was renewed at the shrine of the deity. These cycles of renewal, Mr. Davidson has explained and demonstrated in paragraphs 35 and 38 of his book, The Great Pyramid, and also has shown their application in Egyptian history in his work, Early Egypt and Babylonia. These 30-year cycles also form the basis of the 25-20-year cycles of prophecy, as 84 times 30 equals 2520, and are fully explained in my 7 times of prophecy. The first Egyptian dynasties, whose kings were Aryans, instituted a series of renewal or said festivals that had their origin in 622 AK, 3378 BC, which was the year of Enoch's birth. To the Egyptians, their kings were the heaven-born sons of God, who could never die, for they considered that the king sat on the throne of God until the Messiah should come. Ramses II, who was the pharaoh of the oppression and who knew perfectly well that the Israelites in his land were the carriers of the messianic promises, declared that the Egyptians were the messianic carriers and that the Messiah had come in the shape of Osiris. In chapter 6, we have traced the messianic promises back to the early Aryans by means of their crosses. The legends of the phoenix is the story of the translation of Enoch. On Egyptian temples, the phoenix is portrayed as an oval, rising sun with long outstretched wings. Professor Waddell, in his book Phoenician Origins, page 248, shows a Hittite Sumerian seal picturing a phoenix with a cross in the sun. St. Clement of Alexandria tells us that the phoenix is the symbol of the coming resurrection and of the Messiah. Refer to phoenix on title page. And in the language of Malachi 4:2, we read of the returning Messiah as the Son of Righteousness with healing in his wings. All the kingdoms of the ancient world held their kings to be the incarnation of the deity. Concerning this ancient belief and its meaning, Professor S.H. Buchanan, in his The World and the Book, writes on pages 364 and 65, kingly priests, after the order of Melchizedek, standing in a line and hold the hope of a divine incarnation, have held a universal sway over the human races. Montezuma and Mikado, the sun god of the mound builders and the pharaohs, the royal lines of Peru and Central America, Brahma and Chisnu of India, as well as its Buddha, are all the outcome of the faith that looked for the divine one. Men universally have made of this divine one just what Christ's disciples wished to make of him. The conquests of Mexico and Peru by the Spanish were made by the assassination of the royal families holding this hope. This done, The hope of reconstruction departed. The chief difference between the mound builders and other Indians was the result of the destruction of their royal lines. Whenever this was done, they became nomadic and hunters and fell back upon all altarless, intangible worship of the sun as the Great Spirit and faded away. Fully 4/5 of the flags and coins of the nations of the world show traces of origin from the patriarchal cherubim. Wait, I got my little button. I think it works. Okay, very good. If then all the ancients whose kings were mostly Aryan believed their rulers to be the vicars of the Messiah until his return, is it not only natural that a son of David should sit upon the throne of Jehovah as David and Solomon did until he come who right? Whose right it is? According to the promises quoted, that throne would never be left vacant, for according to Luke 1:32, the Lord God shall give unto him the throne of his father David. God has promised that the throne shall be there when he comes, so it must be somewhere. The faith of faithful Bible students does not seem to be strong enough to believe that David's throne must be somewhere else after it was overturned in Jerusalem in 584 BC, and they also appear to have overlooked the prophecy in Ezekiel 21:25-27, which prophesied that the throne would be overturned. And thou, profane, wicked prince of Israel, whose days is come when iniquity shall have an end, thus saith the Lord God, remove the diadem and take off the crown. This shall not be the same. Exalt him that is low, and abase him that is high. I will overturn it, and it shall be no more until he come whose right it is, and I will give it him. Jeremiah the prophet had warned Zedekiah, his own relative, of the coming judgment. But his warnings were not heeded. To get rid of such a pessimist, the prophet was thrown into a filthy pit, and he was only set free by the command of Nebuchadnezzar after Zedekiah's capture. The captain of the guard even invited him to come with them to Babylon. But Jeremiah's mission lay in another direction, to replant the seed of David in another land. Although Zedekiah's sons were slain, the diadem and the scepter were overturned into the female line. Zedekiah's daughters and these Jeremiah took to Taphanes in Egypt, accompanied by Baruch the scribe, as told in the 34th chapter of Jeremiah. Let us now turn to the riddle that the prophet Ezekiel presents in his 17th chapter. Thus saith the Lord God, a great eagle with great wings, long-winged, full of feathers, which had divers colors, came unto Lebanon and took the highest branch of the cedar. He cropped off the top of his young twigs and carried it into a land of traffic. He set it in a city of merchants. He took also of the seed of the land and planted it in a fruitful field. He placed it by great waters and set it as a willow tree. And it grew and became a spreading vine of low stature, whose branches turned towards him, and the roots thereof were under him. So it became a vine and brought forth branches and shot forth sprigs. The word eagle is, no doubt, used to represent a means of transportation, for it came and took and carried something into another land. That something was his young twigs, young members of the highest branch of the cedar of Lebanon, symbols of the royalty of Palestine. Also the seed of the land, the people of Israel, was placed in another land by the great waters, not the Mediterranean, was planted in a fruitful field, set it as a willow tree. No other tree will take root as easily and quickly as a willow. It increased and became a vine, these vines of low stature, and turned its branches towards him. This him must necessarily be above the branches, i.e., be acknowledged as a ruler, but the inference is that this ruler is also not very high, i.e. low, because the vine is of low stature. This personage referred to as him is the low one to whom the diadem was to be turned over. Previously, we have related the wanderings of many of the people of Israel to Ireland by the great waters. Quoting the 7th and 8th verses, we continue the riddle. There was also another great eagle with great wings and many feathers. And behold, this vine did bend her roots towards him, and shot forth her branches towards him, that he might water it by the furrows of her plantation. It was planted in a good soil by great waters, that it might bring forth branches, and that it might bear fruit, that it might be a goodly vine. Another great eagle means a different means of transportation than the one used before, and this vine bent her roots towards him. That is, a female twig joining a male twig by the furrows of her plantation. The last phrase helps us greatly to identify the place by the great waters where the replanting was to take place in Ulster, Ireland. For in olden time, Ulster is spoken of as the plantation of Ulster. I, the Lord, have brought down the high tree, have exalted the low tree, have dried up the green tree, and have made the dry tree to flourish. I, the Lord, have spoken and have done it. Ezekiel 17:24. For further elucidation of this subject, the reader is referred to the Reverend J.H. Allen's book, Judah's Scepter and Joseph's Birthright, and J.D. Massey's interesting work, Tamar Tepi. As scripture tells us that Jeremiah took the king's daughters into Egypt and we lose sight of them there, by analogy, we apply Ezekiel's riddle of the tender twig to the transplanting of the royal line into Ulster, and therefore let us take up the thread from there and follow it. Irish historians are unanimous that about 580 BC there arrived in Ulster a notable man, a patriarch or saint, accompanied by an eastern princess and a lesser person by the name of Simon Brock or Berek. This party brought with them several remarkable things about which Ireland's songs and legends cluster. Those things were a harp, David's harp, and a wonderful stone, the stone of destiny, the Leah Fail. According to many traditions, Jeremiah took the princesses to Spain, where one of them married a prince of Zaragoza. With the other princes, he arrived in Ulster sometime later. Irish tradition tells us that Jeremiah married the prince Tamar Tepi to Acca, the Hermaeon, head king of Ireland, after the latter had embraced the worship of the true Jehovah. Jeremiah became the chief figure in Irish history, life, and religion. He became the patriarch of Ireland, and it is the original St. Patrick. The latter was, as is well known, not an Irishman at all, but an early missionary to Ireland who was interpolated by the Roman Church to take the place of the original Saint Patriarch of Ireland for reasons of their own. In Simon Berek, who accompanied them, we recognize Baruch, the scribe of Jeremiah 36. For 25 centuries, Irish songs and ballads have lauded the princes who came with Jeremiah. Tamar Tefi, meaning Tamar the princess. She is also spoken of as T. Tefi. Irish historians call her the king's daughter or the daughter of Pharaoh, Pharaoh meaning royal house. Tamar, we will recall, was also the name of her ancestor, the mother of Zerah and Pharez. Her name and her story, as well as that of the Patriarch of Ireland, are so interwoven with Irish folklore, traditions, and history that it is difficult for critical highbrows to eradicate it. The Hebrew Phoenician words connected with Tamar Tefi, Jeremiah, and Terah alone provide a powerful evidence of their Hebrew origin. Jeremiah is known in Irish tradition as the Olam Fodhola, or Fola. Olam denotes in Hebrew the possession of hidden knowledge. Fola in Hebrew is wonderful, or in Celtic, revealer, the two together describing a Hebrew prophet. Jeremiah, the Olam Fola, demanded from the Heremon, the king, a renunciation of the Baal and serpent worship practiced in Ireland and acceptance of the Mosaic law and the worship of Jehovah before he gave his charge, the princess Tamar, to the king for a wife. For this eradication of the serpent worship appears to have grown the legend that the patriarch St. Patrick drove the snakes out of Ireland. At Cathair Crofin, the royal residence, Jeremiah established a school or college known in Irish history as the Mer Olamain, or School of Wisdom. And the name of Cathair Crofin was changed to Tara, which word is derived from the Hebrew Phoenician Torah, meaning the law. In the succeeding centuries, Tara became a famous seat of learning, not only for Ireland, but also for Western Europe. It is of this center that Thomas More wrote, "The harp that once through Tara's halls the soul of music shed, now hangs as mute on Tara's walls as if that soul were fled. So sleep the pride of former days, so glory's thrill is over. O hearts that once beat high for praise, now feel that pulse no more." For over 2,000 years, the only national emblem that Ireland held. I'm going to leave it there. I'll stop for there now. How much more is this one? Yeah, that's good. That's a good break. And that was 25 minutes. Okay, page 154. For over 2,000 years, the only national emblem that Ireland had was the Harp of Tara with its angel guardian. That emblem was seen floating from her castles and was stamped upon her shields and coins and is seen upon the stamps of the new Free State. For documentary proofs concerning the role that the Tamar or Tefi and Jeremiah played in Irish lore, the reader is referred to the Reverend Milner's excellent work, The Royal House of Britain, which also contains an exhaustive chronological chart of the Royal House of Judah, Judah Zara, and Judah Pharez, tracing the descent of many noble houses from that line. The Princess Tefi is said to be buried in a burial mound, the Great Murgesh, on the hill of Tara. See Plate 23. Several attempts have been made by archaeologists to enter that mound, but every attempt has been frustrated by the neighboring Irish peasantry with guns and pitchforks. That mound is sacred to the Irish people, but some day soon it will be opened and speculation is rife as to what it will contain. In the historic Four Courts of Dublin hangs a companionship with Moses, a medallion portrait of the great Irish legislator identified by the Reverend F.R.A. Glover with Jeremiah, shown on Plate 24. Jeremiah himself is said to be buried near the ruins of Devenish Abbey on the Isle of Devenish in Lower Low Erne near Enniskillen, County Fermanagh. Tamar Tefi's marriage to Yochai, the head king of Ireland, accomplished the transplanting of the royal line of Judah, Pharez, David, and him from him that is high of Ezekiel's riddle to him that is low. For Eochad himself was of the line of Judah Zerah, as a descendant of the Milesian prince Gallam, who, at the head of the Gadelos, overcame the Danans about 700 BC. Professor Totten of Yale, in his Irish genealogy, traces Gallam's descent to Calcol, brother of Darda and son of Zerah. Professor Totten says, the term Milesian is derived from the medieval title of Gallam, the conqueror of Ireland, who was called Milesis, or the Milesian, i.e., the soldier, a term derived from the Latin miles, whence we derive our word militia. In chapter 10, it has been explained that Gallam and Gadelos are derived from the Hebrew Phoenician Gadil, meaning to become great. In the plural, the exalted, fortunate ones, or fortune seekers. Thus, the Hebrew roots indicate that these people, the people of Gedalius, were the exalted ones who were low at first, but who were to inherit the dadium of David after it was taken from Zedekiah. It was around the hand of Zerah, meaning the seed, that the midwife tied the scarlet thread. And Professor Totten tells us that in Milesian records of old Ireland, the sons of Gedalius or Gallam call themselves the Curaith na Crumb Rud, meaning the Knights of the Red Branch. Some of my readers who are of Scotch-Irish descent will find in Fair Baron's crests of the leading families of Great Britain and Ireland several crests picturing a forearm which stands for the red hand of Ulster and indicates that their ancestors belonged to the Knights of the Red Branch. When Princess Tamar of the line of Judah Pharez, the breach, married Eachad, the prince of the scarlet thread, the high tree of Ezekiel's riddle had united with the low tree, and the two branches of Judah, Pharez, and Zerah were reunited. But we must always bear in mind that it was of the line of Pharez, the breach. The Messiah came to heal the breach. Furthermore, the Knights of the Red Branch, of whom Gallum the conquering Milesian was one, called themselves Cronogs, or the crowned. The true meaning of their name is treetops, for it comes from words common to all dialects: cron, a tree, and og, a tuft, or termination. We use the same word for a crown as they did, and the very use of it in common language would be enough to verify this identity of race, were there not other reasons in their history and legends to establish it conclusively. Totem. The memory of the Scarlet Thread is still kept alive in Britain, although unwittingly. Every one of the British official papers is wrapped with a red cord. Likewise, a red thread runs through every rope in the British Navy, and we still talk about red tape. From this union of Tamar Tefi with Eachad, the Haramon of Ireland of Tara, sprang the long line of Irish Ardogs, or overlords, who for 1,000 years were crowned upon the stone of Israel and wielded the scepter of Judah over the whole land of Ireland. The last of those Ardas was Murtaugh, who, dying without male issue, left his daughter Erica, who married Murdoch, king of Abilene, Dublin. This was the second transfer through a female. These people of Western and Northern Ireland call themselves Scots, as Bede in the ecclesiastical history records, and Western Ireland was then called Scotland. About this time, the 5th century, the Pictish clans of Caledonia had weakened themselves by intertribal warfare, and the west coast offered opportunity for invasion. Fergus MacEarcha, son of the Princess Erica, headed an armada across the Irish Sea and landed on the Mull of Kintyre, or Kintraw, which word is derived from the Hebrew kanaz, nest, and tur, rock. After much stubborn fighting, he occupied the whole of the Ard, leader, and Gillow, he that overturns. Fergus also occupied the southern Hebrides from Heber, including the high or island of Ionia, on which there was already at this time a cathedral and a congregation. Here Fergus was crowned king on the Stone of Destiny in 498 AD during the reign of Adrian, 548 to 604. The 4th king of Argyll, St. Columba, came to the island of Ionia and founded a famous school of missionaries. It was here that the Presbyterian Church of Scotland was founded. The 15th king of Argyll, Kenneth MacAplan, 836 to 854, married the heiress of the Pictish throne of Scotland and became the first king of Scotland. His descendant, the 7th Malcolm II, was murdered in Glamis Castle, leaving only his daughter Beatrix to carry on the royal line of Judah. She married Crinan, the Thane of Albanac. Thus the scepter of Judah was transferred for the 3rd time. 7 kings of the house of Albanac ruled over Scotland. As the last one died without issue, the 2 daughters of David, Earl of Huntingdon, carried on the line of Judah. Margaret married Alan, Lord of Galloway, and founded the house of Bailo. Isabella married Robert Bruce, Lord of Annandale, and founded the House of Bruce. This was the 4th transference of the scepter of Judah. Many readers of Scotch descent can trace their genealogy to these ancient houses and through them to the royal line of David. The 5th transfer took place when Margaret Bruce married Walter, the Steward of Scotland, and thus founded the House of Stuart. When James IV of Scotland, son of Mary by Lord Darnley, became James I of England, the scepter of Judah ruled over the United Kingdom of England, Scotland, and Wales, and all the various divisions of Israel. The Celts, the Saxons, the Angles, and the Jutes had been blended into one nation. the Stuart reign came to an end. The House of Orange ruled only for a short time, but the scepter of Judah was transferred again for the sixth time when Princess Sophia, daughter of James I, married Ernest of Guelph, Duke of Brunswick, who was the line of Judah Zerah Odin, as spoken of in the previous chapter. See chronological chart by Milner. The son of the two was George I of England. The scepter remained in the House of Guelph until Queen Victoria, and then passed into the House of Saxe-Coburg with Edward VII, son of Prince Albert and Queen Victoria. This was the seventh transfer. The next and final transfer will be when King George or Prince David hands it back to him whose right it is, and that will be very soon. This will be the eighth transfer. 8 is the number of Christ, marking a new beginning. Concerning the significance of the number 8, refer to the 7 times of prophecy, page 81. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet until Shiloh come, was the prophecy, and it has been fulfilled to the letter. Almost all the noble houses of Europe have lost their scepters, and they are wondering why. The British throne is yet standing. In this connection, it is interesting to recall the remark of King Edward, which he made 30 years ago at Cannes to Grand Duke Alexander of Russia, as told by the latter in his book, The Twilight of Royalty. Pointing to the present Prince of Wales, who was then only a child, King Edward said to the Grand Duke, "There is the last King of England." The Reverend J. H. Allen, in his book Judah's Scepter and Joseph's Birthright, gives an appendix in which he traces the genealogy of the British sovereigns in an unbroken line from Adam. This list was compiled some 20 years ago and ended with King Edward VII. The authors of that list were wholly oblivious to any significance of numbers, yet it reveals some numerical units that are most startling to students of prophecy. And I'll let that play for a second. I think that's the 30 generations from Adam to Obed. I'll let that play for a second. I don't know. I guess I could read it. 30 generations from Adam to Obed, father of Jesse. 31, Jesse, with whom begins the royal line. 49, 18 kings of Palestine. 50, Titefi the 50th. 103, 53 kings of Ireland from Eachad to Erica. 116, 13 kings of Argyllshire from Fergus. 141, 25 sovereign of Scotland from Kenneth II to Mary. 10 sovereigns of England from James I to Edward VII. To the above list, we now add the name of the present King George. We have reached the climax of these numbers if we add to the foregoing Prince David of Wales. His number is the mysterious number 153, the number of the elect. Refer to the Great Pyramid's Message to America, page 28, second edition. In this connection, it is striking to note that the Prince of Wales has so far refused to marry. He will be the last king of England. Will he be the last king of England? Question mark. Probably the most treasured possession of the court of St. James, St. Jacob's, is the coronation stone in Westminster Abbey. See plate 25. All of Britain's princes and princes who have reigned in Ireland, Scotland, or England from Tamar, Tefi to Queen Victoria and since have been crowned upon that stone. This is British history and not fiction. The stone lies beneath the seat of the coronation chair. It is of oblong shape, about 26 inches in length, 16 inches broad, and 11 inches high. It is a dull reddish sandstone. There is none other like it in Britain. Geologists tell us that it belongs to a sandstone formation near the Dead Sea. On each side of it are 2 iron rings through which poles were passed to carry it. This stone has been resting in Westminster Abbey since 1298 AD, when Edward I brought it from the Abbey of Scone. Before that, it lay in the Church of Iona, where Fergus the Great was crowned upon it in 498 AD, after he had inherited the stone from his mother Erica, whose ancestors kept it in the royal hall of Tara for 1,000 years. Yet its rings are worn down by years of carrying. An old Irish rune refers to that stone and was put into the following words by Sir Walter Scott. Unless the fates are faithless grown, and prophet's voice be vain, where'er is found this sacred stone, the wanderer's race shall reign. Edward first called it a precious relic. The stone of destiny is said to be Jacob's stone, upon which he laid his head on the plains of Luz. It is the stone of Ireland, the rock that was carried in the wilderness, which was smitten by Moses twice, and the waters gushed out abundantly. Sometimes it is spoken of in the Old Testament as the pillar upon which Israel's kings were crowned, and God went up from him in the place where he talked with him, and Jacob set up a pillar in the place where he talked with him, even a pillar of stone. And he poured a drink offering thereon, and he poured oil thereon. And Jacob called the name of the place where God spake with him Bethel. Genesis 35, 13, 15. That rock, Bethel, the Lord's house, is in the Lord's house today, i.e. in Westminster Abbey, and beneath the stone lie the mortal remains of the kings of Israel. When Titefi brought with her that symbol into the Isles of the West, the diadem was overturned for the first time. When her descendant, the Irish Princess Erica, passed it to her son Fergus, king of Argyllshire, the symbol went to Scotland, and the diadem was turned over for the second time, and for the third time into England when the son of Mary Queen of Scots became James I of England. It was this third turnover that gave us the English Bible. Truly God has kept his word. He promised David that there should never lack a man to sit upon the throne of David. He has overturned that throne 3 times, as we have seen, and it is still in existence today, waiting for Shiloh to come. And the Lord shall give unto him the throne of his father David, and he shall reign over the house of Jacob forever, and of his dominion there shall be no end. Shiloh means rest giver, and Shiloh alone can give us rest and deliver us from the present chaos. Unto him shall the gathering of the people be, as Jacob said. Nothing but his wisdom and power can restore order out of the weltering chaos of human factions. His throne will not be set up in Britain nor yet in Old Jerusalem, but in Shiloh, which is located 10 miles north of Jerusalem and will form the center of the millennial Jerusalem, a city 24 miles square, as told in Ezekiel chapters 40 to 48. Then out of Zion shall go forth the law and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem, Isaiah 2:3. No amount of unbelief can hold up to God's plans, and our people who have been led astray by their teachers and shepherds are earnestly advised to study God's plans for themselves, as found in his book, and now corroborated by the monuments. How much longer must our people suffer before they turn to the Bible for guidance instead of the wisdom and beliefs of men? All right. Chapter 13. The United States in Prophecy. In the preceding chapters, I have collected what evidence I could gather and present in condensed form in these pages concerning the origin of the Celtic and Anglo-Saxon race, who were the builders of the American Republic. Their origin has been shrouded in mystery all these years and still is a mystery to the people at large, so much so that it is received with hostility and ridicule by our educators and clergy. Perhaps this is not strange. Every great advance in thought has been fiercely contested by the upholders of the old concepts. Every advance and reformation has been a revolution, and the greatest revolution in the history of mankind has just begun. The belief that the Jews represent ancient Israel cannot be shaken in a year or two, yet it is that false conception that has almost destroyed the value of significance of the Old Testament to us. Most of the modern criticism of Scripture can be traced to 4 conceptions that Christianity has held for ages, which conceptions have now been proved to be false. First, that Genesis taught that the world was created 4,000 years before Christ, which is not true. The word says, "In the beginning God created," but it does not say when that beginning was, neither does modern science know. Second, the belief that Adam was the first of the species of man, Homo sapiens, is contradicted even by many passages in Genesis referred to in our chapter 2. Adam was, according to over 500 passages in the Old Testament, the first Adamite, not the first Homo sapiens. Adam was the first Aryan, as all the evidence shows, some of which I have collected in this book. Third, the belief in the universal deluge is contradicted by many statements of Scripture and impossible to harmonize with the chronology of the Old Testament, to say nothing of the physical impossibilities and consequences. Once these 3 points in question are explained and seen in their true relations, then it will be seen that there exists absolutely no contradictions between the statements of Genesis and the findings of modern science. The fourth great stumbling block to the critics of the Old Testament has been the assumption that God's chosen people, Israel, were the Jews. In reality, the Jews are only a part of the house of Judah, as must have become clear to the earnest reader of this book. The Jews have their place in the Old Testament, but that place is different from Israel's. The difference between the two houses I have demonstrated in my Destinies of Israel and Judah. Since the Reformation, Orthodox theology has stood almost still as far as the exegesis of the Old Testament is concerned, and during the last 150 years had to stand by helplessly watching the higher critics pick the old book to pieces. With the exception of the scholars of the historicity school of prophecy, the fundamentalists have added practically nothing to their understanding of the Old Testament. During the last century, inquisitive scholars have subjected the scriptures to a searching criticism, which became more hostile as the evolutionary hypothesis began to occupy the minds of men, and a serious rift between the defenders of the old book and its critics developed and widened every year, until today faith in the Bible as the Word of God has been mostly destroyed in the minds of our college-bred classes. What have the fundamentalists done to fight this destructive criticism of the Bible? Practically nothing. What could they do but say, "The Bible says so, and we believe it"? Historical proofs they could not furnish, with the exception of anti-evolutionary arguments defending Genesis and some arguments concerning the book of Daniel. Orthodoxy has done little or nothing to counteract the destructive arguments of the critics. 9 out of every 10 commentaries on the Old Testament existing have been written from the higher critical viewpoint, and the fundamentalist authors of the few orthodox commentaries had to take refuge in spiritualizing what they could not explain any other way. No greater admission on the part of the orthodox groups that they do not understand the Old Testament can be found than in our Sunday school lessons. The board who composes those lessons walks through the Old Testament with 7-league boots, so to speak, merely touching a chapter or even only a few passages of each book here and there, and many Sunday school scholars have wondered, as the author used to do, what about the other 99% that we are skipping over? Is that mystery or mythology? But our Sunday school board could not teach what they did not know themselves, and the only thing they could do with those mysterious chapters was to leave them severely alone. The Old Testament, indeed, is nothing else but legends, if we assume that the people of Israel are the Jews, and we cannot blame the modern critics for condemning it as Jewish mythology. Many of the critics, from Thomas Paine to Robert Ingersoll and Professor Driver of Oxford, have challenged orthodoxy to prove to them where, when, and how the glorious promises which Jehovah made to his chosen people have been fulfilled in the Jews, and the fundamentalists have been unable to furnish those proofs. Thousands of sermons have been preached on the birthright, on the characters of Esau and Jacob, and how the latter obtained the birthright deceitfully from his brother. But all that our good friends, the preachers, Orthodox and Modernist, have been able to tell us is that the birthright pertained to spiritual blessings. Let us examine this question for a moment. If Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were Jews, as our theologians tell us, then those supposed spiritual blessings of the birthright do in no wise belong to us, but only to the Jews. Neither can those blessings be transmuted to the Gentile church, for Jacob committed a very unchristian act in the way he obtained the birthright from his hungry brother. The church has always been in Israel, both in Old as well as New Testament times, and still is. All the apostles, with the exception of Judas, who was a Jew, were Israelites, and so have been most of the church fathers. The first church in Europe was started in 37 AD in Glastonbury, England, as has already been told in chapter 11. When St. Paul went to Rome in 66 AD, he found there already a group of Christians who had come from England. A Gentile church, of which we hear so much, does not exist nor ever did exist in our land. Our theologians are merely repeating that phrase without examining the case. Most of the epistles are addressed to the 12 tribes scattered abroad. The epistle to the Hebrews should make that fact plain, both in title and text. There is no equivalent in Greek for our term Gentile. It is an English word and found in no other language. Gentile is derived from the Latin gens, meaning tribes. Paul said, I am an apostle to the ethnos, meaning nations or tribes, and meant in this case the tribes of Israel. In general, however, the word ethnos is translated heathen. As a heathen church would be an absurdity, it becomes obvious that the term Gentile church is a misnomer. For further discussion of this all-important subject, I refer the reader to my Destinies of Israel and Judah. The early churches founded by the apostles in the East have developed into the Latin, Greek, Armenian, and Coptic churches, and as such could be termed Gentile in the sense that we understand it. But the Protestant church and its various forms has since the Reformation been in Israel, the Anglo-Saxon nations. However, let us turn to the birthright. For want of space, we can quote only a few references concerning it. And the Lord said, Shall I hide from Abraham that thing which I do, seeing that Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. By myself I have sworn that, Genesis 18, 17, and 18. By myself I sworn, saith the Lord, for because thou hast done this thing, and hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, that in blessing I will bless thee, and in multiplying I will multiply thy seed as the stars of the heaven, and as the sand which is upon the seashore. And thy seed shall possess the gate of his enemies, and in thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because thou hast obeyed my voice. Genesis 22, 16, 18. And thy seed shall be as the dust of the earth, and thou shalt spread abroad to the west, and to the east, and to the north, and to the south. And in thee and in thy seed shall all the families of the earth be blessed. And behold, I am with thee, and will keep thee in all places whither thou goest, and will bring thee again into this land. For I will not leave thee until I have done that which I have spoken thee of. Genesis 28, 14, 15. And God said unto him, Thy name is Jacob, thy name shall not be called any more Jacob, but Israel shall be thy name. And he called his name Israel. And God said unto him, I am God Almighty, be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a company of nations shall be of thee, and kings shall come out of thy loins. Genesis 35, 10, 11. A more detailed discussion of those promises the reader will find in my Destinies of Israel and Judah. If the earnest reader pays attention to those passages, then he or she will find that they cannot be applied to the Jews, and in fact were never intended for them, but belonged to the covenant race, the British or the Saxon race, the sons of Isaac as found in the Celtic, Saxon, and Nordic races of the British Empire, Northern Europe, and the United States of America. It is Great Britain and America that hold the gates, the strategic points of the world, as, for instance, Gibraltar, Malta, Suez, Aden, Singapore, Hong Kong, Cape of Good Hope, the Falkland Islands, the Panama Canal, Hawaii, and the Philippines. There has been only one company of nations, the Anglo-Saxon nations. These facts are crying aloud for recognition, and if we can see in them the fulfillment of God's glorious promises to our ancestors, then the old Bible becomes a new book to us, and we find in its promises and prophecies the title deeds of Anglo-Saxon world supremacy and leadership, a hegemony that we have almost lost, for we never knew where it came from, and we have never given God the due credit for it. The Mosaic Law is the basis of our common law as divergent from the civil law of Europe, and if we had kept close to the Ten Commandments, then we would not be in the fix we are in today. A valuable exposition of this law question and the interested reader A valuable exposition of this law, question the interested reader will find in The Law of the Lord, the Common Law by Reverend Pasco Gord. But let us now turn to Genesis 48:15-20, and note how the dying Jacob transferred the birthright blessings to the sons of Joseph and not to the sons of Judah, from whom the Jews in Christ are descended. And he blessed Joseph and said, God, before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac did walk, the God which fed me all my life long unto this day, the angel which redeemed me from all evil, bless the lads, and let my name be named on them, and the name of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth. And when Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand upon the head of Ephraim, it displeased him, and he held up his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head unto Manasseh's head. And Joseph said unto his father, Not so, my father, for this is the firstborn. Put thy right hand upon his head. And his father refused and said, I know it, my son, I know it. He also shall become a people, and he also shall be great. But truly his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his seed shall become a multitude of nations. And he blessed them that day, saying, In thee shall Israel bless, saying, God make thee as Ephraim and as Manasseh. And he set Ephraim before Manasseh. Although Manasseh was the older of the two, yet the chief blessing was given to the younger, Ephraim, that he should become a multitude of nations. We have seen that story recited perhaps in some Bible story books or perhaps in some Bible pageants, but we have never heard it explained from our pulpits, Orthodox or modernist. Our preachers never studied this question in their seminaries and therefore know nothing about it. And if you wish to fall from your pastor's grace, reader, then press him to explain those passages. Need we wonder then that the critics tell us that all that stuff is Jewish mythology, when no preacher can explain it, neither fundamentalist or modernist? And coming to the point, if the British Empire and its Commonwealth of Nations, including our Republic, does not answer to that multitude of nations, then there is no other group of nations that has ever filled the bill. And all these stories are indeed what the critics claim they are, Jewish traditions. Turning to the 49th chapter of Genesis, we read in verses 22-26, Joseph is a fruitful bow, even a fruitful bow by a well, whose branches run over the wall. The archers have sorely grieved him, and shot at him, and hated him. But his bow abode in strength, and the arms of his hands were made strong by the hands of the mighty God of Jacob. From thence is the shepherd of the stone of Israel, even by the hand of thy father who shall help thee, and by the Almighty who shall bless thee with blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that lieth under, blessings of the breasts and of the womb. The blessings of thy father have prevailed above the blessings of my progenitors unto the utmost bounds of the everlasting hills. They shall be they shall be on the head of Joseph, and on the crown of the head of him that was separate from his brethren. If those verses mean anything to you, reader, then what do they tell? Blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep, of the breasts, and of the womb. As Christ came of the line of Judah, then those blessings cannot be spiritual but material, of rich harvests, of mineral resources, and of numerical increase, as the sands upon the seashore, unto the utmost bounds of the everlasting hills. Who has inherited the richest mines and oil lands and boundless wheat fields, cornfields, and pasture lands of the temperate zone in Northern Europe, North America, South Africa, and Australia, but the Anglo-Saxon race to which you belong, reader? Don't the facts stare you in the face. However, let me get a sip of coffee on that however. It is a fact that facts always precede any theories formulated about them, and people argue for years on verities which only needed recognition, as for instance, the movement of the earth around the sun. Yet when Copernicus had observed it and taught it, he was ridiculed by his age, and particularly by the theologians. All that we need today is a right slant on the Bible so we may see in its pages our history pre-written, for history is his story. Once more, we find the birthright blessings confirmed upon the sons of Joseph by Moses in the 33rd chapter of Deuteronomy, verses 13 to 16. And of Joseph he said, Blessed of the Lord be his land, for the precious things of heaven, for the dew, and for the deep that coucheth beneath, and for the precious fruits brought forth by the sun, and for the precious things put forth by the moon, and for the chief things of the ancient mountains, and for the precious things of the lasting hills, and for the precious things of the earth and fullness thereof, and for the good will of him that dwelt in the bush. Let the blessings come upon the head of Joseph and upon the top of the head of him that was separated from his brethren. If our Orthodox friends have any faith in these promises, then I must ask them, where do they think that Joseph's land is located? It cannot be Old Palestine, nor the New Palestine, for God's promise in Genesis 28:15 is that these blessings shall come from Israel's return to Palestine. And I trust that our fundamentalist friends won't try and tell us that Joseph's land is in heaven. For the chief things of the ancient mountains and for the precious things of the lasting hills, those promises can only apply to that vast mineral oil, forest, stream, and agricultural wealth of North America and the British Empire. God has promised them to our father Joseph, and we have inherited them without giving God the credit for this rich heritage. Instead, we have taken that heritage, and it has now become a curse to us, for most of our people use that heritage for the amassing of gold and not for the blessing of their fellowmen. The great question that confronts us is, can we blame our theologians for their blindness and failure to interpret God's promise to us, or is this part of Israel's blindness until the fullness of the Gentiles' nations be come in, as Paul stated in Romans 11:25? Joseph was separate from his brethren, as the passage just quoted states. His glory is like the firstling of his bullock, and his horns are like the horns of unicorns. With them he shall push the people together to the ends of the earth, and they are the 10,000s of Ephraim, and they are the thousands of Manasseh. We have already seen in chapter 11 that it was the Asa or Angles who wore the horns of the bull as headdress when they invaded Germany and Britain, and thus fulfilled their divinely appointed destiny as the leaders of the Celtic Saxon race. Hence, England is called John Bull, and one of the symbols on her coat of arms is a unicorn, which symbol we also find in the ancient rock carving of the Sakai of India, as shown on our frontispiece. According to accurate chronology, as fixed by Mr. Davidson in his early Egypt, Babylonia, and Central Asia, as shown in simple form in my coordinated chronology of Israel and Egypt, the entry of Jacob into Egypt took place in 1702 BC during the reign of Thames or Thothmes III of the 17th dynasty. It was during his reign that the famine occurred, at which time Joseph became the prime minister of Pharaoh. Joseph married Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, a priest of the temple of On in ancient Memphis. It was there that Joseph was governor and saved up the grain for the coming famine. There, in the public square of Memphis, stood two obelisks, and there are no other two obelisks in the world like them. Where are those two obelisks today? One of them is Cleopatra's Needle, standing in the Thames Embankment in London, and the other stands in Central Park, New York City. It was presented by Ishmael Khedive of Egypt to the United States and brought to New York by Mr. H.C. Vanderbilt in 1880. See plate 26. Yeah. 36 centuries ago, Joseph's children, Ephraim and Manasseh played around those two obelisks in ancient Memphis, the city capital of Egypt, and today those two monuments are standing in the metropolitan centers of the two great nations, Ephraim and Manasseh, which still hold the birthright of the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. There is no more touching story in the Old Testament than the story of Joseph and his brethren and how he recognized and forgave them when he had come to power. That story has thrilled the hearts of millions of Anglo-Saxon Bible readers, but how much more would it thrill them if they knew that Joseph was our grandsire and that those two obelisks were silent witnesses of the calling of our race to world leadership and Christian service. When the Most High divided to the nations their inheritance, when he separated the sons of Adam, he set the bounds of the people according to the number of the children of Israel. For the Lord's portion is his people. Jacob is the lot of his inheritance. He found him in a desert land, and in the waste howling wilderness he led him about. He instructed him. He kept him as the apple of his eye, as an eagle stirreth up her nest, fluttereth over her young, spreadeth abroad her wings, taketh them, beareth them on her wings. So the Lord alone did lead him, and there was no strange God with him. He made him ride on the high places of the earth, that he might eat the increase of the fields, and he made him to suck honey out of the rock, and oil out of the flinty rock. Of the rock that begat thee, thou art unmindful, and hast forgotten God that formed thee. Oh, that they were wise, that they understood this, that they would consider their latter end. Deuteronomy 32, 18 to 13, 18, and 29. How faithfully Jehovah has kept his promise to his people. He has set us upon the high places of the earth. He gave us the richest increase of fields. He allowed us to suck oil out of the rock, and how little we have appreciated his blessings. Our preachers never told us how much we really owe to God and to his promises. All right, page 170. Where was I? We've already seen in chapters 5 and 6 that the symbols of the Barat Phoenicians, Israel, were the sun, the cross, and eagle, the phoenix, and a woman, Barati or Britannia. And if we now turn to the 12th chapter of Revelation, we find these same symbols used again. And there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars, the 12 tribes of Israel. And she brought forth a man-child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up unto God and to his throne. And to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness. Where is that wilderness? Again, if we look to the British Empire and the United States of America, we find the answer. It was our race, the Covenant or Saxon race, that has inherited the desolate wilderness and made it bloom. Spain occupied portions of North America but could not hold them. France followed Spain to build on our shores a colonial empire but did not succeed. The British and Saxons came, settled on the eastern shore, founded there our republic, and occupied the desolate heritage which had been preserved for us. Now, verses 6 and 14 of the 12th chapter of Revelation speak of a period of 1,260 days, and times and a half a time, which 2 periods combined represent 20 years, as all students of prophecy know, demonstrated in my 7 times of prophecy. For a period of 2520 solar years, Israel is to be kept in a place prepared for her, in the appointed place, which place, as we have seen, is the covenant land, Britain. If we date 20 years from the beginning of Israel's captivity in 745 BC, we arrive at the year 1776 AD. Every American knows that date, and its chronological connection with 745 BC proves again our lineal descent from ancient Israel. It was then that a new nation was born, or rather from ancient Israel. Nope. It was then that a new nation was born, or rather an old nation reborn, entering into the heritage promised to our grandsires, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Joseph, Ephraim, and Manasseh. In America were the 13 tribes of Israel reunited. There were the 13 colonies that broke away from the mother country. The number 13 has been called the unlucky number, but a little examination will show that it is our national number, and a very lucky one indeed. Our national emblem, the American eagle, consists of 13 letters, and the eagle holds in its right talon an olive branch with 13 leaves, and in its left 13 arrows. In its beak, the eagle holds a scroll on which is written in 13 letters, E pluribus unum, one out of many, and above this is a cloud in which shine 13 stars. Does not that cloud remind us of the cloud of the Lord that accompanied Israel in all their journeys? See Exodus 40:36. There are also 13 bars on our flag and 13 rods in our national mace. Massachusetts, as a colony, had an emblem and a motto. That emblem was a pine tree, at the base of which was coiled a rattlesnake. Above the tree, the motto reads, "An appeal to God." 13 letters beneath the snake, another motto, and 13 letters, "Don't tread on me." All through our history, the number 13 stands out preeminently. July the 4th, the birthday of our nation, contains 13 letters, and our first Navy consisted of 13 ships. The Confederate flag held 13 stars, although there were only 11 states in the Confederacy. Fort Sumter was fired upon on the 13th day, and Dewey took Manila on the 13th. We entered the World War under Woodrow Wilson, whose name contains 13 letters. The first expedition to France sailed in 13 ships. They left on the 13th of June, 1917, and took just 13 days to cross. The Battle of Bellewood, our troops' first major engagement, took place on Friday the 13th of June, the birthday of General John P. Pershing, who has also 13 letters in his name. Are all these number 13s merely a coincidence, or do they constitute mythical symbols which indicate the presence and action of the unseen hand of Jehovah? On the reverse side of our Great Seal is shown a symbolical pyramid, and on its suspended apex stone is portrayed the eye of the Almighty watching over the destiny of our nation. This pyramid, shown as standing in the wilderness, also consists of 13 courses of stone representing the 13 states, and is symbolic of that building erected by the descendants of the 13 tribes in the wilderness of the New World. Above it is written in 13 letters, Anut Coptis, he has favored our beginning. But that pyramid stands unfinished. Its apex stone is suspended above it. And symbolizes that our people will yet be compelled by the conditions of the present crisis to call upon God to finish the building for them. Then the new order referred to below in the inscription, Novus Ordo Seclorum, a new order of ages has begun, will indeed be with us. To that new order, present-day events are hastening. Writing on this symbolism, Professor Totten of Yale in The Seal of History writes, "Now the preliminary date thereof is 1776. It is a type only, or prophecy of the Novus Ordo Seclorum itself, which is yet future. In that day an elect body, founded on the apostles, in its proportions circummetric in every sense of the word, will be recognized by all mankind, and all nations and tongues shall flow to it to know the truth which maketh free indeed." The reverse face of the Great Seal is thus preeminently a type of the body of Christ, and an ensign of the new covenant yet to be consummated. In this connection, it is important to point to the Great Pyramid of Giza, which was also constructed without an apex stone. As the Great Pyramid represents a structural allegory of the kingdom of God, it is only in harmony with that allegory that its symbolic apex stone is missing, for the kingdom upon earth will be consummated only under Christ, the stone which the builders rejected. To understand more fully the reference to this pyramid allegory of Scripture, the interested reader is referred to My Great Pyramid's Message to America. In my book, The 7 Times of Prophecy, I have demonstrated the course of the prophetic cycles of Israel's 2,520-year punishment, and have shown that the first series, beginning in 970 BC, the year of the breaking up of Solomon's kingdom terminated in 1551 AD, marking the middle of the great century of Reformation. And that Reformation took place primarily among the Anglo-Saxon nations. The time had then arrived for Israel, regathered in the isles and coastlands of the West, to shake off their age-old enemy, Rome. The story of that Reformation is too well known to repeat it here, but few have observed its real setting, its national and racial significance. With only isolated exceptions, it was the Saxon or Nordic race, the people of the British Isles, northwestern Germany, Holland, the Scandinavian countries, and the Huguenots of France, who protested against papal doctrines and domination and went back to the open Bible. Assyria, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, and the revived Roman Empire, the papacy had ruled over Israel as the prophets had declared. But now the time of Israel's rebirth had come, and they began to carry out their appointed mission with the Bible as their textbook to become the pioneers of the Christian civilization. In 1558, Elizabeth became the Queen of England. During her long reign, the people of England developed that marked character of the Anglo-Saxons of giving fair play to their fellow men. Religion became a matter of the individual's choice and right, and each man's home became his castle. Despite the many attempts of papists to foment religious trouble, and despite several uprisings of Catholic nobles against the Queen, the attempted invasion of the Spanish Armada cemented Protestants and Catholics into one nation. English sea dogs like Hawkins, Cavendish, Frobisher, and Drake impudently dared the might of Spain and in small vessels attacked the big Spanish galleons wherever they found them. Of Philip's proud armada of 140 ships, manned with 30,000 men and 3,000 guns, not one ship, nor even a boat, ever landed on the shores of Britain. Only 53 ships returned to the ports of Spain after being driven around the north of Scotland. The vessels that had escaped, the little ships of the English Navy, were destroyed by the storms of the Northern Ocean. Surely this was the Lord's doing, and the people of England knew it and praised God for it. With Elizabeth's reign began the British sea power and the freedom of the seas that guaranteed protection for all who were engaged in peaceful enterprise. If it had not been for that little English navy that broke the power of Spain and the papacy, no Bible nor a single Protestant missionary would have ever reached the shores of America. In fact, it is very doubtful whether English settlement on our shores would have been possible at all. Before Elizabeth, England was a weak and divided nation, and Catholic Spain the mighty power and mistress of the sea. But when Elizabeth died in 1603, a new power had arisen out of the sea, Great Britain, Britannia. The ancient Barati of the Phoenician sailors had at last awakened from her age-old sleep. The phoenix of Israel that had sunken in the east with the demise of Solomon had risen again to greater glory in the west in preparation for its appointed destiny. That destiny was to be the great protective power of civilization, as spoken of in the Vishnu Purana epic. His Bharat Phoenician sources of subsistence are arms and the protection of the earth, the guardianship of the earth in his special province. According to Genesis, that destiny was to be a great and mighty nation and a company of nations. And according to Isaiah, ye are my witnesses, saith the Lord, and my servant whom I have chosen. It is to this period of Israel's rebirth, beginning with the Great Reformation, that Isaiah's message is addressed as set forth in chapters 40 to 66. This is that portion of Isaiah which Professor Breasted and his friends, the critics, say was written by another, but unknown, Hebrew prophet who lived after the Babylonian captivity. The critics are trying to tell us that this portion of Isaiah was fulfilled during the Jews' return to Palestine, but no Jews are mentioned in these chapters of Isaiah. Neither were the Jews located in the isles of the west to which these messages are addressed. Listen, O isles, unto me, and hearken, ye people from far. The Lord hath called me from the womb, from the bowels of my mother hath he made mention of my name, and he hath made my mouth like a sharp sword. In the shadow of his hand hath he hid me, and said unto me, Thou art my servant, O Israel, in whom I will be glorified. And I said, I have labored in vain, I have spent my strength for naught, and in vain, yet surely my judgment is with the Lord, and my work with my God. And now saith the Lord that formed me from the womb to be his servant, to bring Jacob again to him. Though Israel be not gathered, yet shall I be glorious in the eyes of the Lord, and my God shall be my strength. And he said, It is a light thing, and thou shouldest be my servant to raise up the tribes of Jacob, and to restore the preserved of Israel. I will also give thee for a light to the Gentiles, that thou mayest be my salvation unto the end of the earth. Thus saith the Lord, in an acceptable time I have heard thee, and in a day of salvation have I helped thee. And I will preserve thee, and give thee for a covenant of the people, to establish the earth, to cause to inherit the desolate heritages, that thou mayest say to the prisoners, Go forth to them that are in darkness, shew yourselves. They shall feed in the ways, and their pastures shall be in all high places. Isaiah 40, 1-10. This is his covenant of the people, the Britham that Jehovah has made with us, to proclaim his salvation to the ends of the earth, to set the prisoners free, and prepare for the kingdom of heaven upon earth. These passages and many of those other beautiful chapters of this portion of Isaiah, starting with the 40th chapter, have comforted many hearts, but they would mean much more to us if we realize that they have a national as well as an individual meaning. From thousands of pulpits, these portions of Isaiah have been read without the listeners knowing that they actually belong to us and to our race. The churches which have proclaimed those messages of God's salvation are in Israel, not among the Jews, nor among the heathen. That was our mission and responsibility, to preach salvation to the ends of the earth. It was our mission to print the word, and our race has done what has been done. The British and Foreign Bible Society, several American Bible Societies, and the German Society have printed the Bible in 800 different languages and sown the seed throughout the world through 30,000 missionaries. Hear ye deaf, and look ye blind, that ye may see. Who is blind but my servant, or deaf as my messenger that I sent? Who is as blind as he that is perfect, and blind as the Lord's servant, saying many things, but thou observest not, opening the ears, but he heareth not. The Lord is well pleased for his righteousness' sake. He will magnify the law and make it honorable. But this is a people robbed and spoiled. They are all of them snared in holes, and they are hid in prison houses. They are for a prey, and none delivereth; for a spoil, and none saith, Restore. Who among you will give ear to this? Who will hearken and hear? For the time is come. Isaiah 42, 18-23. When the Pilgrim Fathers landed on the shores of New England over 3 centuries ago, they and their successors, the pioneers, brought the Bible with them and depended upon the God of our fathers, the God of Israel, to guide them in conquering the American wilderness. Exactly 7 prophetic times, or 25-20 years, from the beginning of the end of the kingdom of Israel in 745 BC, our republic began in 1776 AD, when the descendants of the 13 tribes had regathered on our shores and started to build a new structure, a new pyramid, but that pyramid is still unfinished. In fact, it was in grave danger during the last few years because some of its foundations were built upon shifting sand, upon gold and greed, and it began to sink. Mr. D. Davidson, in his work, The Great Pyramid's Prophecy Concerning the British Empire in America, has shown that the Great Pyramid's chronology fixed the 10th of January 1776 as an epoch-making date in the history of Israel in America. It was on the 10th of January 1776 that Thomas Paine published his pamphlet Common Sense, in which he called upon the people of the colonies to rebel against the motherland. Refer also to Kingdom Bulletin number 2. It was also Thomas Paine who started in America the era of rational criticism of the Bible, which paved the road for the doctrine of evolution in our colleges and ushered in our modern era of materialism that almost overwhelmed the spiritual teachings of the Bible. Orthodox theology was helpless to stem that tide of rationalism and was rapidly overcome until it is doubtful whether today 1/3 of our churches are still loyal to the fundamentals of Scripture. It is also evident that most of our college-bred classes have inhaled the iconoclasm of the critics and philosophers, and today most of them feel like lost sheep in a wilderness of diverse thoughts. The school of Athens and its philosophers has displaced in our educational system the Hebrew school of the apostles and prophets, for our people never knew that they were Hebrews themselves, the great colonizing race. And now, after experimenting for ages with Babylonian systems of starcraft and economics, the Athenian, as well as every other heathen form of philosophy, our leaders are going back to the teachings of the Hebrew scriptures and realize that there is no other hope for our nation and the world than to follow Jesus Christ and adopt and practice the principles of his kingdom, which kingdom is now imminent. God has kept his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph, but we, their descendants, have been unmindful of our heritage and of the rock that begat us. If my friends, the fundamentalists, had had more knowledge of the Old Testament and could have demonstrated to an unbelieving world that our Anglo-Saxon supremacy and civilization is a verification of God's covenant with Abraham and his seed, then the theory of man's evolution from primates could never have received the general acceptance it has. If we are not the descendants of Abraham of 4,000 years ago, then how can we be the sons of Adam of 6,000 years ago? And if we are not Hebrews, then we must have grown like the evolutionists tell us we did. We just happened this way and just grew like Topsy thought she did. It is time for orthodoxy to awake and stand for the whole Bible, for God is marching on. No doubt millions were thrilled when they listened over the radio one Sunday afternoon in June of 1933 to that wonderful oratorio, Handel's Messiah, sung by 7,000 voices at the Century of Progress exposition. But unfortunately, they were unconscious of the fact that those glorious words found in the 40th chapter of Isaiah were Jehovah's own words to our race and to our day. Comfort ye, my people, saith God. Speak ye comfortably to Jerusalem, and cry unto her that her welfare is accomplished, that her iniquity is pardoned. For she hath received of the Lord's hand double for all her sins. The voice of him that crieth in the wilderness, prepare ye the way of the Lord, make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Every valley shall be exalted, and every mountain and hill shall be made low, and the crooked shall be made straight, and the rough places plain. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together, for the mouth of the Lord hath spoken it. The voice said, Cry, and he said, What shall I cry? All flesh is grass, and all the goodliness thereof is as the flower of the field. The grass wherewith the flower fadeth, because the Spirit of the Lord bloweth upon it. Surely the people is grass. The grass withereth, the flower fadeth, but the word of our God shall stand forever. O Zion, that bringeth good tidings, lift up thy voice with strength. Lift it up, be not afraid. Say unto the cities of Judah, Behold your God. Behold, the Lord God will come with strong hand, and his arm shall rule for him. And behold, his reward is with him, and his work before him. He shall feed his flock like a shepherd. He shall gather the lambs with his arm, and carry them in his bosom, and shall gently lead those that are with young. Who hath measured the waters in the hollow of his hand, and meted out heaven with the span, and comprehended the dust of the earth in a measure, and weighed the mountains in scales, and the hills in a balance? Who hath directed the Spirit of the Lord, or being his counselor hath taught him? Isaiah 40:1-13. The voice of him that crieth in the wilderness is not merely the voice of John the Baptist, who prepared for the Messiah's coming, but looks forward to the time that we are living in, when a new spirit is rising amidst the ruins of a dying system and is preparing us for the new age and the return of the Messiah to occupy the throne of his father David. Have ye not known? Have ye not heard? Hath it not been told you from the beginning? Have ye not understood from the foundations of the earth? It is he that sitteth upon the circle of the earth, and the inhabitants thereof are as grasshoppers, that stretcheth out the heavens as a curtain, and spreadeth them out as a tent to dwell in, that bringeth the princes to nothing. He maketh the judges of the earth as vanity. Why sayest thou, O Jacob, and speaketh, O Israel, my way is hid from the Lord, and my judgment is passed over from my God? Hast thou not known, hast thou not heard, that the everlasting God, the Lord, the Creator of the ends of the earth, fainteth not, neither is weary? There is no searching of his understanding. He giveth power to the faint, and to them that have no might he increaseth strength. Even the youth shall faint and be weary, and the young men shall utterly fail. But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary, and they shall walk and not faint. It seems that our shepherds have missed much when they tell their flocks that the Old Testament belongs to the Jews, and at the same time derive spiritual messages from its pages. A great awakening has begun in our land, and a still greater one is in store for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. It is characteristic of our age that many of our people are looking solely to science to bring about the new age and leave God out of the equation entirely. They appear to be through with God, but they will yet find that God is not through with them. These are strange days, and stranger things are yet to follow. Serious trouble is in our land today because we have forsaken the God of our fathers and worshipped other gods. It is of this time that Jeremiah is speaking in the 30th chapter, verses 4 to 8. And these are the words that the Lord spake concerning Israel and concerning Judah. For thus saith the Lord, we have heard a voice of trembling, of fear, and not of peace. Ask ye now, and see whether a man doth travail with child. Wherefore do I see every man with his hands on his loins as a woman in travail, and all faces are turned into paleness. Alas, for that day is great, so that none is like it. It is even the time of Jacob's trouble, but he shall be saved of it. For it shall come to pass in that day, saith the Lord of hosts, that I will break his yoke from off thy neck, and will burst thy bonds, and strangers shall no more serve themselves of him. Jacob, our people, God's people, shall be saved of it, out of it, or as the marginal reading has it, may be saved out of it. America and Great Britain have lost their way, but are now finding it again in this valley of disappointment and tears. And through this present collapse of the Babylonian economic system, which we have followed all these centuries, our people will find their way to Jehovah their God and to his kingdom. Who hath heard such a thing? Who hath seen such things? Shall the earth be made to bring forth in one day, or shall a nation be born at once? For as soon as Zion travailed, she brought forth her children. Isaiah 66:8. In closing, I wish to quote these immortal lines of Rudyard Kipling, who evidently was conscious of our origin and our calling. God of our fathers, known of old, Lord of our far-flung battle line, beneath whose awful hand we hold dominion over palm and pine, Lord God of hosts, be with us yet, lest we forget, lest we forget. Far called, our navies melt away, on dune and headland sinks the fire. Lo, all our pomp of yesterday is one with Nineveh and Tyre. Judge of the nations, spare us yet, lest we forget, lest we forget. For a heathen heart that puts her trust in reeking tube and iron shard, all valiant dust that builds on dust, and guarding calls not thee to guard. For frantic boast and foolish word, the mercy on thy people, Lord. And I think that's it.